They locked eyes once again, the man clearly sizing him up. At last he responded, a lot more silently than usual. I understand, Your Grace. It brings me and House Umber great pleasure you value our loyalty so much. It also pleases me personally to hear you praise my son and brother in that way. I will not make the same mistake again, rest assured. It was clear he had difficulty speaking the words, but no disloyalty could be found in his eyes. Now he had sufficiently humbled him, he needed to pick him back up. He didn't want any resentment to follow because of this. Good, for me this concludes this business. Now if you would be so good to accompany me, he asked, as he stood up from behind the desk. Follow you, Your Grace? The Umber Lord questioned, both surprised and a little reserved. He probably expected some form of immediate punishment. Yes, I intend to call for a meeting with all the commanders to decide our next moves. Your presence as one of my most loyal and trusted lords is expected. He responded, softening his features to his normal posture once again. The Great Yon looked at him surprised, before standing up as well. I can do that. Lead the way, Your Grace. The man boomed, his usual self once more. They left the solar once he had gathered all the maps he needed. He ordered some of his guard to bring all his commanders towards the small hall. The Marbrands had 2 halls in their castle, a great one for feasts and guests and a smaller one for immediate family and allies. Their solar was too small for all his lords, so they would have to gather there. He especially asked for the small Jan, To and Daisy to accompany their kin, as they had commanded their own troops by now and their council would do fine. It also helped in keeping the Great Yon on his toes, although he seemed proud of his son's achievements. After going towards the Maester's office to pick up today's letters, the man gave him 3 letters, 2 came from Winterfell and 1 from Riverrun. One had the signal he and Alis had prearranged to mean it was personal. The others would be state business. He put his wife's personal letter in his pocket and carried the others towards the meeting. He would open them with his nobles present to show them of his trust in them. Soon they reached the hall and many of his men were already there. He knew some would have to come from the army encampment, and so he talked with those already present until everyone had arrived. He opened the maps of the Westerlands and spread them across the table. I thank you for all coming so quickly, my lords. I have decided upon the next strategy and would like to share it with you. I would also appreciate any of your insights or improvements upon it, but first we have some news from both our home fronts. He responded, as he presented both letters. He opened the one from Winterfell first and was disappointed to see it only contained Maester Lewin's words and not his wife's delicate hand. After reading it through quickly, he smiled. Lord Galbart, he addressed his faithful vassal, it seems your keep has finally been freed from the Ironborn. Your family is all fine. It is notable to mention that your keep stood fast under multiple attacks. He praised the head of House Glover, as he handed him the letter. The man smiled at the praise and his family's health and quickly started reading the letter. Not waiting on him, he addressed the rest of the room. The mountain clans, together with some help of Hodder Umber, circled around the Ironborn and destroyed their ships and most of their supplies. In the meantime, killing the scum's entire rearguard. Asha Greyjoy and her force have packed up all they could carry and left quickly. She has fled into the Wolf's Wood with all her men. She did what now? Owen Nuri exclaimed. That's a death sentence right there. My mother comes from Clan Woods, my uncles and cousins will bleed them dry until nothing is left of them. They will. Galbart said with a smile. Although most of the Wolfwood clan's men have joined me in my march and are either below these walls or with my brother Robert at the Twins. Among them are many of your uncles and cousins. Still, some like your cousin Ned and men from other clans remain. Even if they are not numerous enough to ambush them themselves, they will be more than enough to guide your father's kin to the slaughter. The man looked finally happy again, now that he knew his brother's children and keep were safe. The knowledge that revenge for their suffering was imminent also helped, he imagined. So, that takes care of Balon's daughter and her 1,000 men then? Mage Mormont asked. That seems to be the case. She can march south towards Moat Cailin, which she will never reach. Lords Hornwood and Sewin, together with my family's men, will stop them around Winterfell if they try. They most likely won't, as they don't have enough supplies for the march. Her other chance is to move west in a circle towards the stony shore and meet up with the remnants that attacked Torrens Square. They might be able to ferry some home to their despicable islands, but, even then, half her force would be left for us to destroy. My queen has already sent word to Lord Roswell and Leopold Tallheart to scout out their ship's position. He answered, looking at Roose Roswell at the end. My father and brother will find the ships, your grace, of that I have no doubt. The man simply responded. I do too. Even if they don't, it might not matter. Sir Roderick and Lord Hornwood assure me that they will never leave the Wolf's Wood alive. They're right. None can move quicker through those woods than the clans. They use paths even I don't know the existence of. Lord Galbart smiled. That's settled then. After they destroy the force in the Wolfwood, the clans might join the march on Moat Cailin. Hopefully we can rid the north of those raiders once and for all. He shifted the conversation. I intend to send words to all the houses between Winterfell and Moat Cailin to start preparing their troops to march. If they unite under the banner of Lord Serwyn, Hornwood and Sir Roderick, they can march on the moat from the north, while Robert Glover comes from the south. Together with some help from the Reeds and Dustins, we can maybe surprise attack their ships on the Salt Spear. When they are stuck, we siege the Ironborn out from both sides until they surrender. He explained the plan he and John had constructed over the last week. Couldn't they just march on the northern force in strength and defeat it while a token force holds the causeway? Robin Flint asked him. They could, if we didn't give the northern force orders to retreat and come back every time they try. At the same time, the help from House Reed could allow us to try to take Moat Cailin, while the Ironborn are distracted. If we succeed, we catch the Ironborn force out in the open without supplies. If we fail, we continue sieging them out without engaging. It will be bloody. They will not surrender easily. Even caught out in the open, they will still charge one army or the other. I realize the other army can surround them then, but many of our men will still die in the fight. Lord Flint warned, and rightfully so. But it's the best we can do right now. John replied. Now Lord Flint nodded sadly, as did most of the other lords present. Then that's agreed, the Ravens will leave on the morrow. He finalized. Another letter has arrived, this one from Riverrun. He continued, and he saw Sir Brynden, Sir Lucas and Lord Deddings perk up, Black Walder and his father doing the same. He opened the letter and read through it. He couldn't believe his eyes. This changed everything. To King Rob. News has come from King's Landing. Stannis Baratheon has attacked the city and seems to have almost succeeded in taking it. Tywin Lannister seems to have showed up together with 70,000 Tyrells. A long and fierce battle seems to have erupted, which ended in the death of Lord Stannis and his cause. If I know more, I will send it to you immediately. Your uncle, Sir Edmure Tully, the heir to Riverrun. He read the note again and again until he finally looked up at his awaiting vassals. Not knowing what to say, he just read the letter aloud. Immediately the hall erupted with all men shouting their opinions. He had to think. He had planned to march on Lannisport. This Sir Damian Lannister seemed capable but slow, and his green troops were outnumbered by his veteran men. If he could swiftly ride for the city, he could catch them off guard and destroy them beneath the walls. This would have given him the opportunity to assault the city, maybe it would even surrender after the defeat. Now this was all in jeopardy. He looked upon the big map of the Westerlands and noticed Old Oak and Red Lake, among other keeps, directly south of its border. If the Tyrells and Lannisters had allied, an army could already be moving north into the west. If they managed to gather and organize the scattered remnants at Lannisport, he would be horribly outnumbered and could be pinned in the west. The worst thing was that he had no way of checking this. He could not scout anything south of Lannisport because of the army that was in the way. They needed to get out of here or risk all their loot and prisoners, as well as his army. The same that could happen from the south could also happen to the east. If Lord Tywin managed to beat his uncle or Lord Rickard, they could march into the Westerlands and pin him without a way to escape. He couldn't leave without another trophy though. His men were ready and expected another victory. He needed to do something, but Lannisport and through it most of the Westerlands was out of the question. He could march on the Banefort or Case and feast fires, but he risked being pinned between them and a Lannister and Tyrell force from the south. As his lords kept shouting at each other, he saw he had only one option. A victory that would cement his campaign in the west as a major victory, as well as give him a means to get all of his soldiers, prisoners and loot safely towards Riverrun. He looked up and only now realized how badly chaos had erupted in the room. Sir Ryman Free even suggesting that they needed to negotiate with the Lannisters now. An idea which no other lord took kindly to. Sir Brynden, Jon and Harry looked at him stoically, expecting him to put an end to this. He would do just so. "My lords," he said loudly, but his voice was drowned out in all of the shouting. Sighing, he signed the small Jon. His friend quickly understood his task and bellowed like only an Umber could. "Attention for his grace." The noise quickly calmed down, while the great Jon grinned at his son's antics. His friend seemed to wink back at his father. Umbers, a different breed entirely. He took a deep breath and started talking. "As some of you might already have realized, an alliance between the Tyrells and Lannisters could mean that we get trapped here in the west with all our gains. I had prepared an elaborate plan to defeat the Lannisters outside of Lannisport and take the city, but that is all for naught now. Reach forces could already be marching to reinforce the Lannisters there, and that is not a position I would like to be in." Some of his lords nodded at that, as they looked at his movements across the map. He was then forcing his words with the movements of the pieces of the armies, making it easier for them to follow. "If we move towards Case and Feast Fires or even the Banefort, we could get pinned between Reach forces and a reorganized Lannister force and the Keep. That would mean disaster for us. So those plans are entirely off the table as well," he explained, as he showed how they could trap them. "That leaves only one viable option. We take the Golden Tooth. From there we can easily retreat back towards Riverrun. It would also give us an easy way to transport all our loot to the Riverlands. Maybe even more importantly, if we take the Golden Tooth, we deny the Lannisters the possibility to easily march in the Westerlands and take back their lands. They would have to march around, leaving King's Landing more vulnerable. We could also use it as a base from which to stage a new campaign, if need be," he stated, more and more confident of the plan as he thought about it aloud. Most lords seemed to agree, glad for a sense of direction and a common purpose. Still some hesitated. "What if we get pinned between the Golden Tooth and the enemy army?" Domeric asked. "We would know it long beforehand, as they would march off the lands we have already conquered. This gives us ample time to either prepare for battle or more likely retreat the same way we came from," he replied. "That would mean we would have to leave most of our loot." Wendell Mondaly replied evenly. Many lords started grumbling at that, chief among them the Freys and Umbers. It would," he replied honestly. The grumblings of the Freys and Umbers grew louder at that, with others like Dacey or Lord Flint joining in. "I don't think it has to come to that." Lord Deddings jumped in on the conversation. "Not if we siege the Golden Tooth from both sides," he stated as he moved towards the map. "We could send word to the Pipers and Vances to gather their hosts and attack the Keep from the east. Both houses were harmed by the Lannister force that included the Leffords. They will be jumping at the opportunity for revenge on their hostile neighbor." Now most lords perked up, and he must admit, the addition showed value. That would work." The Great Jon almost voiced his own thoughts. He nodded, everyone in agreement. "If we take the Golden Tooth from both sides, it will both be quicker and easier." Most agreed, but the Blackfish still delayed. "When I scouted out their lands, I noticed how the Leffords were always quick to send forces after me to push me from the lands. Could we not use this to our advantage?" he asked, deep in thought. "If we send a raiding force of some 200 or 300 men in their lands to get them to give chase, we could trap them like we did the Kingslayer in the Whispering Wood." "Would they really fall for that?" Harry asked. "Yes. I think so. Their commander Sir Humphrey Lefford, a distant cousin of the late Lord Leo, seems overly eager to give chase. If we make the force small enough that he outnumbers it but big enough so that it's a threat to their villages, we could trap a lot of the forces outside. I only sported 100 scouts and outriders and he chased me with over 4 times that number. If we send 300 or even 400 raiders, he might give chase with close to 1,000 men," his uncle explained. "That's almost the entire force stationed there," Jon pointed out. "It is. The Blackfish agreed. Their prisoners from Oxford had told them that Sir Folly Prester, the survivor of the Battle of Riverrun, had joined Sir Stafford with 700 veteran troops before Oxcross happened. They had apparently been the backbone of Sir Stafford's attempt to retreat while Sir Folly had been captured in the original battle. This meant that only some 800 men from Sir James's force remained and they were stationed at the Golden Tooth. If you added the Leford's personal retainers and hastily gathered extra Levi, the force there probably counted some 1,200 men left, as they had discussed before. That would make capturing the castle a lot easier. The Great Jon said in thought, before smiling. I like it. Nothing comes close to slaughtering Lannisters in ambushes, except maybe doing the same to Greyjoys. Alas, only my uncle Hodder is the only Umber that can do that at the moment, but I'll gladly take Lannisters for now. He looked around and saw that everyone agreed. The plan has merit. Even if it fails, we can still storm the castle the obvious way. I propose you lead the raiding force yourself, uncle, as no one can bait Lannister like you can. He responded with a smile. Most of Lords laughed at that, as they all thought about the surprise of the Lannister force at the Whispering Wood. The army is ready, so I suggest you depart 2 days from now after we settle on a suitable position for the ambush. Then our army will be ready there 7 days from now. At this his uncle nodded in agreement. After all the men in attendance had agreed, they started trickling out. A lot of work had to be done as they would leave with the army in 3 days. Dom, would you stay with me for a moment? He asked his friend, as he was one of the latter men to leave the room. The Bolton heir nodded and walked over. Once they were alone, he asked. What do you know of the current situation at the Dread Fort? Your father has written me a long while back that he was solving the situation there, but I heard nothing more. Nor does its new Castellan respond to my queen's letters. No more attacks have happened, but if your bastard brother still remains in control of the Bolton lands, and troops, that cannot stand. He has attacked the Hornwood lands and even tried to assault a force that carried my own banners. I hope you can understand that that can't be allowed to pass. His friend sighed and looked angry. I know, I never even met that brother of mine. I had once thought of visiting him, after I heard of his existence, but then he pulled that stunt a few years ago and father sent me towards Barrowton. After that, I wanted nothing to do with him anymore and I thought he had fled, my father told me so. Apparently, he lied. It seems he made him Castellan of the Dread Fort after I left to take control of the Dustin forces. You don't defend your father? He asked. No. How could I? He arranges a betrothal between me and the fattest granddaughter of Walder Free without consulting me. I honestly think that he would have married me already if I weren't here with you. A Free, really? An unimportant Free from some future side branch at that, for what a pot of silver. House Bolton needs to cement itself in the north like it did with my father's marriage to my mother, not some fat Southron flower. His friend ranted. Then it seems he has made that bastard Castellan without even telling me. To make matters worse, he protects him even after he commits treason. If that wasn't enough, my aunt tells me she heard whispers that he is styling himself as Ramsay Bolton, not Snow as he should. If that isn't a direct attack on me and my birthright, I don't know what is. Still, my father ignores my concerns and tells me not to worry, but I don't believe any of it anymore. He should have sent his bastard to the wall a long time ago, if not then he should do it now. It surprised him to hear his friend talk like that. He was talking about his father, but he supposed they had never been close. Dom had lived at the Red Fort or Barrowton for over half his life. It did prove to him how Dom was different from his father and the Red Kings from the past. He was capable, honorable unless the situation demanded otherwise, an excellent cavalry commander, but most of all he was loyal. He was proud to call the Bolton heir his friend. Listen Dom, I don't blame you for this. You have proven yourself honorable time and time again and I will not forget it. I just want to make sure the Bolton lands will remain peaceful for now. If nothing more happens, we can march north together after the war and I will send the bastard to the wall myself. Your father wouldn't dare to deny me if I am at his door with my men, least of all if you and your aunt join me. You will inherit the Dread Fort, one way or the other. It will do our families some good to finally have a Bolton and a Stark that can call themselves friends. Maybe those that come after us can finally leave history behind them. House Bolton can take its place as one of House Stark's strongest and most honored vassals then. He told his friend. You really mean that? Even with history as it is? Dom asked in shock. Yes, why not? The Umbers were once kings of their own. It took many wars and conflicts until they bowed to the old kings of winter. Look at them now. They are strong, respected and valued highly. Many Starks and Umbers have married over the years and the Great Jon is basically guaranteed command here in the West. House Bolton is even stronger than House Umber, it would only make sense if you had the same. Yet, no marriages were ever recorded nor did your father propose one for you, it was your aunt. He explained, the position of the Boltons always having bothered them. They should have been reduced to loyal vassals or been destroyed. This thing somewhere in between that they had been doing for centuries was not beneficial at all. She did what? The Bolton heir asked in complete shock. You didn't know. Lady Barbary asked for a betrothal between you and Sansa on the King's Road, even after she had been betrothed to Joffrey. My father couldn't accept of course, but she still tried. Your father never asked anything, nor did he even inquire. The whole North inquired after me or Sansa, so that is curious on its own. He told his friend. Sadly, remembering all the letters his father had written him. No, I didn't. A Stark bride would be the best possible marriage I could ever make. For Aunt Barbary to try to achieve that for me, even with her, history with your house means a lot. Why did my father settle for a third tier free? We don't need the silver as much as most other northern houses, truth be told. I just don't understand it. Nor I am afraid, but he has the right to do it. Although I promise you that if she is anything like Blackwalder, I will find a way to get you out of your betrothal. He said honestly. That man made him shiver and the rumors told about him were less than tasteful. He knew Domeric also disliked the man and maybe his resentment of the house was because of that. You mean that? Domeric asked in thought. I do. I would never let one of my friends marry a person like that. Besides, I don't think a female Blackwalder will bring me the peace I want in the Bolton lands. She'd probably hang your small folk for sport. This finally managed to crack a little smile from the Bolton heir. How long would it take her to try her shot at flaying, do you think? He looked at Dom and responded as seriously as he could without laughing. 3 months, at most. They looked at each other then and held each other's gaze before both started laughing. Although it would mean that you had to arrest her. So, I'd be free of her then at least. His friend joked, before turning serious. Still, I'd be stuck with my father in the Dread Fort then. Who knows who he finds for me from there? I'd half expect him to remarry me to a wilderling for a pot of bronze by then. His friend scoffed. You know, Dom. If you're not happy there, I could always give you a role in the running of the kingdom at Winterfell. I will need a council of some sorts after the war. You'd be more than capable to serve on it in some way or form. It would get you from under your father's wing and he couldn't deny it to you as it would be a great honor to House Bolton. Now his friend looked completely flabbergasted. Ah really? Was all he managed to get out? Yes, of course. Not alone of course, and I can't promise you some big position yet, but even an advisory role would be seen as a big honor. It would force you to stay at Winterfell for most of the year. Or I could send you all over the kingdom if you like. It would take you away from that future free wife of yours. He shrugged. Domeric was capable and loyal and he needed men like that. Besides, the man was almost in love with his horse. Sending him out on the road wasn't that bad of an idea, even if it only came to him now. Still, only shock was seen in the pale eyes opposite of him. After a while, he took control of himself once more. Deal. He said strongly as he put his arm forward. He gladly clasped it and responded. Deal. He didn't want to know what his foster father would say, him befriending a Bolton and all, but he felt like it was the right choice to make. Domeric bowed low and left the room and he pondered on the conversation some more. It were strange times indeed, but maybe he could help work on a better future. Chapter 33, Hearing about the Capital. 299 AC. Rob. It had almost been too easy, hadn't it? He thought, as he walked inside the hall of the Golden Tooth with his loyal honor guard behind him. He admired the ceiling decorations. Intricate designs of gold and sky blue covered the ceiling and ran down the golden painted pillars. The wealth of House Leford was on clear display, and in front of him stood Lady Alysanne Leford. Even though she was flanked by 2 of his own guards and was a prisoner in all but name, she still held her head high and looked as dignified as ever. He did have to admire her for that. Sir Brinden's plan had worked out exactly as they had hoped. Sir Humphrey Leford had run into their trap with 750 men. His army was formed up of some 500 survivors of the Battle of Riverrun and their petty nobles, as well as 250 Leford men. The battle had been as brutal as it had been quick. 5,000 horsemen had charged at them from all sides, and the battle had been over in minutes. Still, Sir Humphrey, one of his brothers, and 300 of his men had died by then. The rest surrendered after they saw their leader fall. His losses were minimal: 29 dead and 31 severely wounded. A small but complete victory, and the reason he stood here. His men had mercilessly hunted for survivors, and none had escaped with word to the Golden Tooth. When his men had arrived late the next day, the Lefords were completely shocked. When Houses Piper and Vance arrived with 1,500 men from the east 3 days after that, their fate had been sealed. As most of the forces inside the castle weren't actually men of House Leford, it hadn't been too difficult to sneak in messages to the scattered remnants of the many western houses. Arrows with written messages, riders that shouted proposals at the guards on the walls, one spy that snuck into the castle and worked from the inside. They tried everything, and it paid off. After only 2 weeks of sieging, clashes inside were heard, and the eastern gate was hastily opened by a combination of men from House Prester and some lower knightly houses. They were led by Sir Folly Prester's 14-year-old nephew Garrison. All the boy asked of him after Piper men had rushed in and defeated the scattered Leford host was that he, his uncle and their men would be allowed to go home to feast fires in peace. He promised to remain there and never to take up arms against them anymore. The 3 knightly houses, one sworn to the Marbrands and the other 2 to the Sarsfields, asked for much the same. All were from families that his men had captured, and they just wanted to go home to put things in order while their families were safe. The forces of all those houses in total numbered less than 50 men. If you added the other prisoners of their families, you maybe reached 100 at most. It would not hurt his war effort, and might even erode the Lannisters' hold over the Westerlands more if he let them go. He gave them their word that they would be free to go to their homes and could buy their relatives at very low ransoms, to which they accepted. The only one that had made him pause was Sir Folly Prester, as he was a capable enough commander to rally the scattered western forces in time. However, with the Golden Tooth effectively in his control, that didn't matter too much. The Westerlanders would not be able to move into the Riverlands without it, and he would garrison it strongly. The Presters themselves had also lost most of their men. Of all the men that had rallied either at Oxcross or Riverrun, barely 100 survived. Without forces of his own, it would be difficult for him to get the lords who did to obey. Still, the possible message that House Prester pulled themselves out of the war would be of far greater impact than anything else, and he had to risk it. He stopped in front of the Lady Leford and nodded his head in polite greeting. She ignored him, until Grey Wind and Ghost walked in jovially and stopped next to him and John. The direwolves, just like their master, had been too late to partake in the battle for the keep. The battle in question had actually been nothing more than a few skirmishes between Vance and Piper men and the scattered garrison inside of the castle walls. Still, their loyal companions had already been allowed to celebrate their victory. They had each been gifted with a crippled horse from the Leford stables. Some men had tried to flee, and both horse and rider had paid the price. When Lady Alysanne saw the direwolves, her mask finally cracked. She became white in the face and anxious. He stepped forward. "Good to finally meet you, Lady Alysanne. I am King Robb Stark, and this is my brother Jon Snow. Behind me are some of my loyal companions. Small Janumber, Daisy Mormont, Robin Flint and Domeric Bolton are all heirs of their respective houses. Also present are Sir Lucas Blackwood, Sir Benfrey and Oliver Free and Lord Cale Vance. Finally, to my left are Harry On and Torrin Karstark, my brothers-in-law," he said, as he pointed to each of his companions. She nodded in acknowledgement, without taking her eyes off Grey Wind. "The castle is ours. It will be garrisoned by Lord Vance and his men here, while my army leaves for Riverrun. You will accompany us there, where you will be treated according to your station as the head of a lordly house as powerful as House Lefford is. Do you have any requests of me? You can speak freely. Lady Alysanne looked at him. It was clear she had expected this, but she seemed glad as he mentioned that she would be treated according to her station. She looked him in the eye and spoke clearly. As a matter of fact, I do, King Rob. It seems you acknowledge me as head of House Lefford, for which I am glad. Sadly, not everyone does. Many of my distant cousins are eyeing my seat as we speak. The loss of my keep will only embolden them. I only ask you take them with you as well and keep them somewhere far away from other Westerlander houses. The north would do perfectly, I assume. He looked the young woman over. It was clear she was afraid for her place and her father's legacy. However, he didn't see what could be gained from such a proposal and he voiced as much. Of course, we recognize your position, Lady Lefford, but I do not see what benefit your proposal could bring us. Wouldn't internal squabbles be exactly the thing we are after in the Westerlands? It might on the short term, yes. She said evenly, trying not to look at the direwolves. In the long term, not so much, I am afraid. Whether you win or lose this war, it would be to your benefit and especially to the benefit of Houses Vance and Piper to have a friendly and cooperative House Lefford on its border, would it not? If my distant kin manage to capture my seat, you will find long-time enemies, I'm afraid. From your not-so-subtle messages these past weeks, I learned Sir Humphrey and his brother Sir Benfrey are dead. Well, I can assure you Sir Melwyn won't forgive you for the death of his two elder brothers, nor will their daughters, I'm afraid. He let that information sink in. If that man came to power, he did imagine future strife would be unavoidable. He looked at Lord Cale Vance and saw him look at the lady in front of him with interest. He took him apart for a moment and asked him what he thought about it. Hearing that the Riverlord greatly supported the possibility for future peace, he turned back to Lady Alysanne. I accept your offer, my lady. It will be my pleasure to host you at my uncle's keep. In the meantime, your cousins will equally enjoy their hospitable stay at, let's say, the Twins for now. He replied respectfully. At the mention of the seat of House Free, the woman in front of him actually laughed. She bowed slightly right after and was then peacefully escorted out of the room by one of his guards. 10 days later, he rode into Riverrun with 1,000 men at his back and more loot than they knew what to do with. He had decided to split his army into 5 equal parts under the respective commands of himself, Harry, the Great John, Lord Glover and Lord Deddings. This way each group could safely accompany a great amount of baggage trains carrying loot and prisoners. They hadn't fought this hard for it to be stolen by some foolhardy knight with 100 armed peasants at his back. Funnily enough, those 5 baggage trains weren't enough to carry all of it at once because they couldn't find enough carts to actually transport everything at the same time. As such, Lord Deddings would go back and forth between the Golden Tooth and Ashmark another 2 times with his force, so everything was at the Riverlander border. From there, carts could easily go back and forth to Riverrun until everything was safe. He already planned to transport at least some of it to Seaguard, as he didn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. The moment Moat Cailin was freed, half of it would be on its way north. Osric and some of the Karstark and Stark men had been left in Ashmark to garrison it as it was the most important link in their string of western conquests. He had also been tasked with regularly scouting all the way up to Lannisport to report on possible troop movements or reinforcements from the Reach. He arrived and greeted his uncle Edmure cordially. They loudly celebrated his victory at the fords, as he, John and Sir Brynden cringed internally at the stupidity of the damn battle. After their pleasantries the 4 of them went inside of the Tully Solar. Immediately they all became serious. Why didn't you just stay in Riverrun, as we asked Edmure? Why did you have to play the hero and hold Tywine at the fords? The Blackfish asked the question they had all been wondering. What do you mean? I defeated the old lion. I punched him on the nose, defeated some of his best troops and sent him packing. Edmure boasted, not understanding the stupidity of the whole thing. If you had let him pass, we would have let him chase us up and down the coast of the Westerlands until Stannis Baratheon took King's Landing and put Joffrey's and Cersea's heads on pikes. After that even Tywine would have had to sue for peace. He responded tiredly. Edmure looked at him in complete surprise. Instead, he has now killed the damn bastard and allied himself to a bunch of flowers, tens of thousands of them I may add. Sir Bryndon picked in. But because of my victory you had free rein and managed to take the crag, Sarsfield, Stackspear and the Golden Tooth. Look at the amount of loot you have with you. Wasn't that victory enough? Edmure tried to defend himself. What, those pieces of scraps? That's not even 15% of the loot, nephew. We are now effectively richer than House Lannister. Still, that doesn't make up for your foolishness. The war could have been over by now. Sir Bryndon retorted. Not even 15%. That's a fortune. Edmure whispered. Aye, it is. We did well in the Westerlands, still this war should have been over by now. Jon added. The difference between this and his confrontation with his uncle 3 years ago was night and day. Jon had gained both confidence and experience, and he was not afraid to talk to high-ranking nobles anymore, not even Tullys. The fact Sir Bryndon had actually started to appreciate him since he saw him deal with the Sarsfields had gone a long way in that. Edmure immediately snarled at Jon. You dare speak to me like that? Who even let you in here? This is my solar and I will not have you speak to me this way. Before anyone could do anything, he walked forward until he was close enough to his uncle. First of all, this is not your solar, it's grandfather's. As long as he lives, it's not yours. Secondly, I did. Jon is one of my most trusted advisors and a proven battle commander. You spoke so highly about the capture of Sarsfield and Stackspear. Well, Jon took the first one and made the second one possible while I was wounded and stuck in Ashmark. Thirdly and most importantly, if you ever speak to my brother that way again, I will put Uncle Bryndon in control of all the Riverlander forces and force you to marry a free to make up for your stupidity at the fords. Are we clear? He saw how his uncle swallowed heavily and nodded. It was clear he had adequately cowed his uncle. If you had to deal with the Great Jon and Black Walder on a daily basis, his uncle wasn't so scary. Good, then we can continue this conversation. You still owe me one though, uncle. Might be that I need you married to gain allies soon, but it won't be a free, I promise. He continued with a wink, as he backed off. His brother looked at him in shock while Sir Bryndon nodded supportively. His eyes said it all, good that you put my stupid nephew in his place, Rob. This could have taken forever otherwise. He also laughed at the last notion, as Uncle Edmure's face became white as he thought of himself with a possible free bride. Speaking of Stannis Baratheon. What the actual fuck happened in King's Landing? He asked, still annoyed at that news. I will inform you of all. First, I want to ask you why you had me cut off the Kingslayer's hand. It was cruel and dishonorable to do so, and I did not like it. His uncle asked. He understood the Tully heir's reasoning, so he only sighed. We discovered a plot. Tywin Lannister was plotting with Lady Westerling and her brother to put her daughter in my bed. This way the old lion wanted to put a strain on my alliance with House Karstark and start unraveling the northern unity my father worked so hard for. The Westerling children were innocent, so we have them with us as honored hostages. Lady Westerling, her brother and Maester were dealt with accordingly. Tywin needed to be sent a message. If he was willing to do this, it wouldn't be long before assassinations or abductions would take place upon me, you or other members of our family. I don't want this to become another Dance of Dragons, and he had to realize how far I would go if he tried something like that. His uncle Edmure nodded. It was clear he understood it, but he didn't like it. Well, that was the world they lived in. He didn't like it either, to be perfectly honest, but it had to be done. Now will you please tell me what happened at King's Landing? Sir Bryndon asked with exhaustion in his voice. I'll do you one better. Edmure Tully grinned. I'll present you with an eyewitness of everything that has happened there the last year. An eyewitness. His uncle called for his guards to bring somebody, and they waited until a man in his 20s arrived. He was of average height, had long brown hair and was of a stocky build. The man clearly was a warrior, although he curiously didn't wear a sword. The soldier in front of bowed slightly in respect but remained silent. I'm afraid I don't have the pleasure of knowing your name. He inquired towards the man. My name is Sir Corlys Menning, your grace. The man said. It was short but not meant unrespectfully. Do I know House Menning from somewhere, good sir? He asked the knight in front of him. I don't suppose so, your grace. I've been a hedge knight, same as my father and his father before him. After my father and his brothers made some money, they bought some property on the good side of the city. Me, my brothers, uncles and cousins remained there ever since, when we weren't serving some lord or the other, that is. We were all home for the hands tourney at the time, as most of us wanted to compete. Still, I don't think we ever did something special enough that it might have caught the eye of a Stark, your grace. He nodded at that, as he mulled over the situation in his head. Please, take a seat. I hear you were an eyewitness of what happened at King's Landing the last year. Would you care tell me? He asked patiently. The man nodded and sat down on the chair that was offered to him. Well, it happens that it all starts with the arrival of your lordly father, your grace. The city was restless after the death of the former hand of the king, but much quieted down when he arrived. I happened to see Lord Stark 3 times, although I never had the pleasure to speak with him. Life was good under his short reign. He ruled justly and didn't raise taxes for the sake of it. He answered. At the end he looked at his brother. As I recall, the lad next to you looks a lot like him. He smiled sadly, as he looked to John. He does. That's my brother Jon Snow, sir. The knight bowed his head respectfully, the same he had done towards him before. Good to make your acquaintance, Prince Snow. He couldn't stop his laugh at that, as John turned red. Just John is fine, sir. Lord Snow if you must. I leave the royal titles for my siblings born on the right side of the sheets. John quickly responded, eager to never hear those words again. Very well, Lord Snow. The man agreed, as he bowed again. As I said, I saw your father 3 times. Once when he entered the city with King Robert, another time at the tourney in the stands with your sister, and the 3rd time when he sadly met his end at the hands of that vile monster. Now this piqued his attention. You were there when it happened. Did you see anything odd? What happened there? His brother asked in rapid succession. I sure was. The Queen and her advisors smugly said he wanted to confess. What he confessed shocked everyone, them most of all. After that chaos erupted and the false king shouted for his head like a madman. Your father seemed resigned to his fate. By then he would have known of your march south, and it seems he felt good with that. The knight responded. He and John looked at each other. Father knew they had been coming for him. Moreover, he trusted that they would make things right, with or without him. While the whole crowd erupted and started charging the royal box, your father was dragged to the execution block. He once again screamed the fact that blonde prick was born of incest, and then he went to his gods. By that time men were already dying on the barricades, and fighting between the city watch and Lannister guards and the people had started in earnest. 2 of my cousins and I joined in as well, I must admit. The Lannisters were completely surprised, and dozens of their guards died there that day. They fled to the Red Keep, all the while fighting off attacks from every direction. Multiple nobles died in this attack, even a Lannister got killed. Tywin Lannister, who was Tywin's own nephew. 2 knights of the King's Guard also died, Sir Preston Greenfield and Sir Boros Blount. He mentally wrote that last pieces of information down. They had known a Lannister had died, not which one. This only left Tywin's and Kevan's lines alive of Lord Tytos descendants, an interesting thing to know. The death of 2 King's Guard was also very noteworthy. They were supposedly some of the best fighters in Westeros. He liked them better dead than alive. The next days the city was in complete chaos. Gold cloaks were hunted and those that weren't caught deserted by the dozens. Sir Corlys continued. After 3 days the city was divided into multiple groups. The Lannisters and City Watch managed to control 1/3 of the city under the guidance of the Imp. All areas around the Red Keep were safely under their control. The other parts were divided among different groups who often fought each other. My uncle was a commander in one of those groups and I fought alongside him. My cousin's husband died there fighting another group, while my youngest brother died against a Lannister incursion a few days later. Over the span of the following weeks the Lannisters slowly took control over around half the city, while the other half was divided amongst the 3 remaining groups. This remained the situation until an army of around 4,000 men arrived. They carried the banners of House Crickehall, Riker, Stokeworth, Chelsted and Rosby. The imp let them in through a gate he controlled, and in a span of 2 days they managed to take back control over the whole city. The rebels had one major victory though, as another Lannister bit the dust in the fighting. They said the newly knighted Sir Lancel Lannister charged into the fighting without care of his life and was only carried out of the fray when he was already dead. In response, the army cracked down massively on the city. Hundreds of rebels died, among them the 3 leaders of the groups and another cousin of mine. Many civilians also died, some parts of the city were razed, and I imagine thousands of innocents died those 2 faithful days. Most rebels dispersed instead of fighting to the death however, and so did we. After that the factions among the rebels all but disappeared, as the survivors once more conspired against the Lannisters together. This explained a lot of the information they had received over the past months, but why didn't that force return to join Lord Tywin after this? The knight answered his question before he could even voice it. Although the uprising was quelled officially, the situation remained tense. Guards on their rounds disappeared from time to time. My family and I laid low, as we waited for what would happen. After a while the tensions grew as food got scarcer. Even my family, who is wealthier than most civilians, started to have difficulties. More and more guards started disappearing, and King Joffrey answered this by killing whole groups of civilians in response. The situation grew more and more dangerous, although the Lannisters remained firmly in control of the city. The man licked his lips and accepted a cup of ale from my uncle Ed Muir. He drank deeply and continued. That all changed when King Stannis arrived. The whole city rebelled then. Men like my family jumped out of their hiding spots and took to the streets. My uncle was one of the instigators now, and we all followed him devotedly. The Baratheon fleet was destroyed by wildfire due to some scheme from the imp. Thousands are said to have died, but I only saw a great green flash, as for a moment the whole sky lighted up. He had heard rumors of this at the Golden Tooth, but he had never been sure. With the whole Baratheon fleet destroyed, they were effectively out of the game, as they couldn't even threaten anyone from Dragonstone anymore. Still, King Stannis attacked. The imp and the Crickehole sent multiple sorties out of the gate, and it seemed they would manage to stop the Baratheons, but then the People's Army arrived. All those in hiding managed to rile up thousands of hungry and angry people. Few had forgotten the sack that had taken place when the Targaryens fell, and they all remembered the lion banner there. We first fell upon one of the armories of the city watch. After many of the common people had been armored, we attacked multiple gates. The knight carried on with his tale. We quickly took control over the Mud's Gate. We also trapped the imp and many of his men at the King's Gate. The Baratheon army flowed into the city and almost managed to capture the shit Joffrey himself, although he escaped, but not before killing Sir Osmond Kettleback, the new member of the Kingsguard. The remnants of the city watch quickly threw down their weapons and fled, and a lot of the Crownlanders surrendered on sight. Still the King's Gate resisted. Sandor Clegane and Tyrion Lannister had just led a sortie outside the walls when we arrived. They perished there against King Stannis' army, together with Sir Meryn Trant of the Kingsguard. What? The imp dead? That was amazing news. Despite his stature, the man was nothing short of a genius. He had managed to destroy Stannis' entire fleet with thousands of his soldiers on board without casualties. Besides that, he was a Lannister and Lord Tywin's own son. He had actually quite liked the dwarf when he came to Winterfell, although he wouldn't mourn another dead Lannister. It was clear his family thought the same, but he still nodded to the man to carry on. The Crickeholes and many Crownland nobles tried a fighting retreat towards the Red Keep, but they were slowly whittled down until no one was left. I heard both Lyle and Burton Crickehole died in the fighting there, as well as Lord Renfred Riker and Sir Barman Byrch. The latter was married to the Stokeworth heir, or so I'm told. The knight shrugged, clearly not caring for the death of one noble or another. The latter things all happened around the same time. By now, King Stannis' army entered by the thousands, and together we, together with his vanguard, started hunting the remaining soldiers in the city. Most were slain or forced to surrender, only a few hundred managed to flee to the Red Keep. It looked like a glorious victory for House Baratheon, until at that moment Tywin Lannister and the Damned Flowers arrived. The Hedge Knight swore, and it looked like he wanted to spit after their names dirtied his mouth. Around 7,000 men of the Baratheon force were still outside the city, waiting to get through the gate. Most had been reserves or the forces assaulting the King's Gate. Not all of them had been able to get inside because the king's gate had only just fallen. Those remaining were quickly smashed against the walls. King Stannis quickly tried to organize his men on the inside. He led them back to the gates to try and defend them. The king's gate was closed on time and a hasty defense was put up as the Tyrells used the Baratheons' ladders and ropes to climb the wall while the remainder of the Stormland forces on the outside were butchered all around them. I myself found myself on those walls and we repelled many a Reachman attack. Still it wasn't to be. The man sighed, looking far older than he should at his age now. I later heard that a vassal of King Stannis, who had been among the reserves, forced the Mudgate to stay open, as he and his men fled through it from the outside. This happened because the enemy force had been led by a man on a horse, wearing the armor of Renly Baratheon. The outside forces of King Stannis all panicked and their disorganized lines were smashed to pieces. The enemy poured through the gate, although they paid heavily for every step they made into the city. The king took his elite forces towards there and many rebels freely joined him. He managed to hold the Tyrell advance in the streets for hours and the fight there turned into a bloodbath for both sides. The story progressed, as the knight in front of them took another sip of ale. My brothers and I joined the fighting in those streets, as the King's Gate was holding well enough without our help. At one point the ghost of King Renly charged towards a group of men in the streets with a bodyguard of well-armed knights. They broke through, partly because of the chaos that erupted around the story of the ghost. The king acted swiftly and he and some of his finest knights confronted the knights as he rallied men to his position. A long and hard fight erupted, and I joined in at the end. Many fine knights and lordlings died on both sides there, although I don't know all their names. Finally, the ghost was brought down by 3 of King Stannis' finest knights. He quickly grabbed the man's head and showed to all that it was not his brother but rather Sir Garland Tyrell who had been in the armor. This revitalized the men and we fought on until dark in those streets. Once in a while we were pushed back a bit, but we always managed to reorganize in a way the enemy was halted once more. This went on until nightfall. At that point, the enemy broke through on the walls and soon the King's Gate fell, and the enemy army marched into the city. The whole night was filled with fighting all over and resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Our forces were slowly but surely pushed back, but we made them pay for every corner or alley. In the fighting there, I lost my 2 remaining brothers, one after the other. One of my uncles and 2 of my cousins were said to have died in the fighting around the King's Gate. The man told them sadly. He took his time before continuing once more. I fought through the night until I was separated from the main force with a few men at the rise of dawn. We fought ourselves a way through and I ran home, as I saw the battle was lost. There I saw a handful of Lannister men terrorizing the neighborhood and my uncle and I managed to dispatch of them. I promised my uncle to spirit my 2 young nieces outside the city and carrying them, I ran to the Dragon's Gate. The gate was smashed open and undefended as hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees were fleeing the city in a steady stream. From there we kept walking for weeks until we were finally picked up by Sir Edmure's men. He looked at the knight in front of him. I'm sorry for your loss and I thank you very much for the story. Do you know anything of what happened to King Stannis? He asked. Some refugees I met on the road said they saw him surrounded at the ruins of the Dragon Pit. He seems to have made a last stand there with a few hundred of his followers. At the same time Flea Bottom seems to have gone up in flames. Many of its inhabitants either dying or fleeing the city. If I needed to estimate I would guess at least some tens of thousands of citizens left the city. Together with the deaths, the city should be depopulating heavily by now. He looked at the man with a painful expression. Tens of thousands must have died in the fighting. Thousands of soldiers of both sides, together with an unknown amount of rebels. If this Sir Corlys spoke the truth, thousands upon thousands of those would have died as well. The destruction of the city would maybe have taken even more lives than the fighting did. His hands went to his hair and he pulled at it in pure powerlessness. All those people died and for what? An ugly iron chair and a crown. He swore at that moment, while he looked into the knight's eyes, that he would destroy that chair and make it a memory of the distant past. Too many had died for it, in the past and present. It was time it ended. These damned Southrons could fight for the shattered remnants after he was done if they wished. Did your nieces get here safely with you? Jon asked the hedge knight. Yes, they did. They reside with me in the castle now. Sir Edmure has been very generous. The man nodded and the gratitude was clear to see. I noticed you're not wearing a weapon. He inquired on his turn. I took it from him. It looked safer to me as he still came from King's Landing. His uncle replied at that. He nodded, understanding the reasoning. Still, this man didn't deserve that. He had paid too much to the Lannisters to have his loyalty questioned like that. You there, guardsman? He pointed to a Tully guard standing at the door. The man stepped forward dutifully. Bring this man his sword back. The guard bowed his head and immediately left without saying a word. The knight in front of him looked at him in wonder. After a while he spoke. You and your family have suffered more from the Lannisters than even any of us. I will not have your loyalty questioned. I will give you a choice. Your first option is that you may leave this place on the morrow with 2 new horses, new clothes and enough food and drink to last you and your nieces for weeks. You can settle anywhere in the Riverlands and you won't be bothered anymore as you have fought enough. The second is that you swear yourself to me. In time I promise you some small lands to settle down upon and call your own with your remaining family. There you will be able to live in peace together when this war finally ends. Sir Corlys looked at him in shock. He didn't say anything for a long time, but he waited patiently. The moment the guard entered the room with his sword, the man pulled it out. Immediately Jon and multiple of his guards pulled their own swords out, but the hedge knight ignored them and went on one knee. I offer my services to King Robb Stark. I will shield your back and keep your counsel and give my life for yours if need be. I swear it by the old gods and the new. The knight said, with a firmness and seriousness he hadn't heard from him yet. He knew the oath though, as he had performed it many times before. I vow that you shall always have a place by my hearth, and meat and mead at my table. I pledge to ask no service of you that might bring you dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new. He answered in what his younger siblings would have called his lord's voice in the past. Arise now, Sir Corlys. He finished as he looked at the knight. The man did so and looked at him with nothing short of devotion in his eyes. This took him aback a bit, but he didn't let it bother him. Report yourself to my brother in the morning. He will assign you to your duties. For now, go spend the day with your nieces, you deserved it, good sir. The knight bowed very low before leaving the room. He couldn't do much for the man's late family, but at least he could help the remainder of it. Judging by his devotion, the man would serve him well and he could always use good men. Chapter 34, The Silence Before the Storm. 299 AC. Ricard Karstark. It was a sunny autumn day, as he rode through the fields around Riverrun. At his back were 11,000 sturdy Northmen and Freys. Veterans of the Battle of the Green Fork and some from Maidenpool and Harrenhal as well. On the way here, they had picked up 5,000 Riverlanders as well. The banners of houses Root, Goodbrook, Roger and Leicester blowing behind him in the column. A small contingent of scattered men from House Mouton had also joined him. With their lord dead and their town and castle put to the sword by the Lannisters, they wished to act out their revenge by joining the king's army. Their new lord, a boy of around 10, was staying at Riverrun, so that enticed them as well. The march had been slow, but uneventful. Most of his Northmen consisted of infantry and archers, while rainfall had been a common occurrence. He had sent out his scouts far and wide, but they had found no sign of the enemy. His men had gone beyond Duskendale and into the Reach, but it seemed the Lannisters and Tyrells were still sitting fat on their victory at King's Landing. Maybe the victory had been as brutal as people said, or maybe they just weren't up for another campaign. Whatever the case, he and his men were. Except for his personal campaign to Maidenpool and the march towards Harrenhal, his men had barely done anything. No, that wasn't right, they had also rid the world of the so-called brave companions. A vicious mercenary company from Essos that had raided, burned and pillaged its way through large swaths of the Riverlands on Tywin Lannister's orders. Their foolish leader had come to him and had promised to turn his cloak in return for the lordship of Harrenhal. He had accepted, although he had never even considered holding his word. Ricard Karstark doesn't deal with oathbreakers, and they should know that by now. He had seen how keen their leader Vargo Hoat had been to turn his cloak. No man like that was ever to be trusted. If you combined that with the atrocities he committed to the small folk, The decision had always been clear. The man had delivered him Harrenhal and he had captured him and his men for their crimes in the Riverlands. Any who had resisted had been outright killed. He himself had taken the heads of Hoat and his most trusted companions 2 days later. A thing which earned him the support of much of the remaining Went household. The West AOC among their company were offered a place at the wall, which they all took. The others were hung from the trees in the woods around Harrenhal at the places of their worst crimes. Not long after, the people that lived around the God's Eye came to see him as their liberator. They told him how Tywin had forced their sons and brothers unto arms. Some 500 Riverlanders were forced under arms by the Lannisters. He had used them as cannon fodder at the fords and most survivors deserted and found their way back home since then. Hundreds had volunteered to serve in his army. Some had been survivors from the Lannisters' forced levi, most others family members from those that didn't return. While being stuck in Harrenhal, he had armed and trained a company of 300 men to the best of his abilities. He had thought about having them help guard Harrenhal but decided against it. It wasn't out of the question 1 or 2 Lannister spies had made it into his company. As such, they marched together with his personal men from House Karstark now. He had dressed them in the colours of House Went and would either have them fight under his command or entrust them to Sir Edmure Tully. His mother had been a Went after all, so they might follow him willingly. He had left Sir Willis Marndaly with 1,000 men in command of Harrenhal, as Robb didn't want him to abandon the fortress completely. Those men were all Marndaly men, so no problems in command would arise. Sir Willis was a capable man. He would do as ordered and hold Harrenhal, no more and no less. He had considered giving the command to Lord Bolton as the highest-ranking noble, but he just couldn't trust him with what happened in the north with his bastard. He had brought the Lord with him. Since his wound at the Green Fork he hadn't been the same. He had been even more silent and brooding than usual, and whenever the north was mentioned he had been evasive. No more problems had arisen there, but he couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Roose Bolton rode just behind him, together with Harmond Umber, Sir Donal Locke and nobles from houses Root, Lichester and Goodbrook. Rickard Ryswell had command of the cavalry rearguard while Osric Umber and Lord Roger had the centre. In that manner they rode through the hills around Riverrun. He had been really glad when they had managed to free Donal and Rickard from Harrenhal. Both of them were pretty decent commanders and he could use them as he couldn't do everything himself. Other lower nobles had also rejoined their ranks and it made his army much more stable. The sad thing was that they had also managed to free multiple Freys, but you couldn't win it all. As he rode closer and closer to the castle, he saw how an army camp had already established itself to the west of it. He easily noticed how it was much bigger than the force that had gone with Robb to the south. Sure enough, the banners of Riverland houses that hadn't been joined could be seen clearly. The banners of houses Piper, Blackwood, Bracken and others flew proudly in the wind besides those of House Tully and House Stark. He rode on silently, until he finally rode under the red sandstone gatehouse. He had never seen the castle before, but he had to agree it looked formidable. Formidable, but not that big. Another example of the weak hold the Tullys had over the Riverlands, multiple of their vassals' keeps were bigger than their own. He thought as he rode under the raised portcullis. A group of people stood in front of him behind the gate. He saw his king, the boy he had raised for years, stood in the middle of the group in the courtyard to greet him. He looked both healthy and strong. The campaign had seemingly put some extra muscle on him. He wore a crown now and to his surprise he wore it with ease and authority. It seemed that the boy had finally grown into his role and had become a man and he was proud of him. What made him even more proud, was to see both his sons standing right next to the king on his left side. His bastard brother stood as his effective right hand, which was not so surprising. Still, his family had come far, and he was glad for it. He jumped off his horse and strode towards his king. He went to one knee and bowed deeply. "I bring you back your army, your grace," he said with much decorum. It was the first time he saw Robb since he was crowned, and he needed to show all nobles he obeyed him just as much as the others. He looked up and Robb smiled at him. "You do, and you bring even more of them, considering the extra banners I see." "Thank you, Lord Karstark." He smiled back and nodded respectively, before getting up and walking over to his sons to hug them. It was a relief to see them both so healthy. He did note that his eldest son had a small scar on his left arm. He studied it for a quick second and came to the conclusion that it was nothing. It was the first time he saw his two remaining sons, since the news of Ed's death. He still mourned about his son daily but thanked the gods he hadn't also lost Todd that day. Looking around, he noticed he couldn't see Osric anywhere. He knew he was close to his boys and he asked after him. He didn't want to have to explain to his cousin Arthur how he also lost a son. No, OS is fine, father. He has been governing Ashmark ever since Rob left to take the crag. He's doing a fine job and keeping parts of the Westerlands under control. I gave him part of our men to do so, while some Stark men also joined him. His heir told him, and he nodded. OS was fine and he was making a name for himself, that was good. It wasn't a duty that would get him fame, but it could still bring far. If he did it well, he would entice himself to Rob and maybe even parts of the northern nobility. Speaking of the fact, Rob joined in at that. I might add that he's doing a damn fine job. I don't think we would be able to transport all the loot we got in the West without his organizational skills. Even after his wound, he has proven himself most useful. He has thrown himself upon stewardship and logistics and he seems to have a natural talent for it. He has a sizable garrison with him and the Lannisters aren't making any moves yet, so he's perfectly safe. He was glad to hear that. He could even think of employing him at Carhold after the war, or maybe Rob could do so at Winterfell. He greeted the other lords, taking special care with his neighbors. House Karstark may have risen high, that didn't mean that they could become sloppy. After exchanging pleasantries with Lord Umber and his heir, Lady Mormont and her heir and Lords Glover and Flint, he signed Rob he was ready to go inside. His king ended his own rounds, as he himself struck up some small conversation with the Great Jon and his two eldest sons together with the Marndale brothers. After a while, he was brought inside by his former foster son. The two of them immediately went up the stairs towards the Tully Solar, which Rob had apparently made his own. I will have Harry and Todd brought in soon so we can really celebrate our reunion, but we have to talk first. He nodded in understanding. He knew how hard it could be to rule over Carhold and its forces, ruling over not one but two kingdoms and their forces and squabbling lords would be exhausting. Of course, state business came first. They entered the Solar and he was given a very comfortable seat opposite Rob's desk. He looked at him, as he prepared to speak. He noticed how that massive wolf laid itself lazily along the fireplace. It had grown much since he had last seen it at the Twins. It's very good to see you, Lord Ricard. Ned's son smiled at him. It's great to see you too, my boy. It pleases me greatly to see you have come this far. He responded and he meant it. The man before him looked like the boy he had raised for years, all Tully coloring as usual. However, for the first time when he looked at him all he saw was Stark. The way that he sat, spoke or gazed at you looked so much like Ned it was frightening. He also noticed one or two of his own quirks in there, but that might be wishful thinking. I have thought about you many times, my lord. All your lessons were remembered and applied multiple times throughout my time in Riverrun and the West. One especially struck through: sometimes you have to do things you don't want to keep your people and your family safe. Sometimes you have to make the ugly choices. His king spoke. That lesson. You never liked that one, did ya? He responded and Rob nodded. You could see in his face that it still ate at him, but he had done the things anyway. Good, a leader that didn't care about others suffering or, God's help us, enjoyed it wouldn't do. Well, it's an ugly one but a very important one nonetheless. Now his former foster son agreed, albeit with some reluctance. Well, before we get on with the heavy stuff, I would like to ask you how my sons did in the West. I got letters from you, of course, but it isn't the same. I trust your judgment and I want to know what the future of my house looks like. Maybe I can still clean up some of the rough edges while I'm still here. He asked, smirking at the last sentence. Now those blue eyes laughed honestly. I already told you about your cousin OS. Now Harry was phenomenal. He is a great commander. First, he attacked one of the camps around Riverrun. He did so with great maturity and skill. He managed to keep both the Freys, Boltons and Riswells in check while doing so, which is no easy feat. He nodded. But he let some of the troops go, didn't he? He did, but he had by far the least amount of men in his attacking force. At first, we had wanted to leave the camp alone, but Harry refused. He demanded command if no one else was going to do it. You have to remember this was right after the Whispering Wood. Tor was completely consumed by his emotions, but Harry was different. Oh, he raged and raged, but he channeled his anger towards the battlefield. He had the least amount of men, no backup, and the most awkward position to attack from. His attack on the camp took part in different stages, and I saw the last one from across the river myself. The reason only so few were able to flee was due to Harry. That in turn helped us win Oxcross and later capture the Golden Tooth. The Stark in front of him finished. He thanked his king for the generous words about his heir. What of his campaigns in the west? He led a raiding force along the coast. Did everything perfectly and there were no major problems. Later on, he and Tor aided John with capturing Sarsfield. Both served in a capable and dutiful way, he told me. His cooperation with the heirs of Houses Bolton, Mormont and Umber was exceptionally good, as well as with me and John. Rob responded. He smiled back. That's great news to hear, Rob. He said out of habit. He cursed himself internally. I meant to say your grace, of course, apologies. He quickly added. Really, Lord Ricard. You too, of all people. You raised me for years, and if that wasn't enough, I married your daughter too, which makes us family. I won't be insulted if you call me by my own name. His son-in-law scoffed. He smiled at that. It seems that his king had stayed humble. I have to follow protocol, your grace. House Karstark has already received much, it wouldn't do for us to seem like stand above royal protocol. He replied evenly. He had to think of his house's reputation. As you wish. Rob waved him off. To business it is then, my lord. How many men did you bring with you? Some 10,000 northerners and just over 6,500 Riverlanders, your grace. Among those are just over 1,000 Freys who fought at the Green Fork as well. On our march we were joined by Houses Root, Goodbrook, Roger and Leicester, who make up most of the other Riverlanders. We were also joined by over 100 men from Maidenpool who wish to join their young new lord here. Besides that, there are 300 men I voluntarily levied from around Harrenhal. I managed to arm them and give them basic training. I propose they either join my personal men or the men of House Tully, as Lord Edmure's mother was a Went, and most will appreciate that. His son-in-law nodded. I'll take it up with my uncle. Any problems on the road? He shook his head. No, none. I sent scouts dozens, some even hundreds, of miles south and east, and none reported anything of note. The occasional band of broken men, but nothing else. Speaking of broken men, I have taken care of a few groups around Harrenhal. Hanged up the worst of them and offered the others the choice to take the black. Did the same with Vargo Holt and his band of mercenaries. It gave us some goodwill with the local small folk, restored peace, and hopefully strengthens the wall some as well. You did well, Lord Ricard. The Riverlands, and I thank you for it. His king smiled. I heard you left some men at the Twins. Yes, your grace. I left 2,000 men from Houses Sewin, Glover and Flint of Widow's Watch at the Twins. I gave command to Robert Glover. The man is loyal and capable, and he will do what is needed. He responded. What is it that you think is needed, Lord Karstark? Rob responded. First of all, the troops will help attack Moat Cailin from the south when the time is ripe. It is time we take back the gate to our home, and sooner or later a possibility will present itself. Robert has been commanded to wait for it and take it when it comes along. He looked towards his son-in-law and he seemed to agree, so he just continued. The second reason is to keep House Free in check. I don't trust them at all. Lord Walder is getting greedier by the day. He's also clearly annoyed on top of that. The death of Darin Hornwood and Ed has had him pushing for marriages to all our nobles, as he feels the terms aren't met anymore. He scoffed. He has been pushing me to betroth Harry, but I refused half a dozen times. I offered him Tor instead, but he greedily wants my heir. He has also been bothering Harmond Umber for a marriage and Sir Willis Marndaly and Osric Umber for betrothals for their daughters. When all of them refused, he grew quite wroth. Even with the betrothal to your brother and heir he still demands more. 2,000 men on his doorstep will do him some good. He finished, quite satisfied as he thought at the old man's useless screaming. HMMN, thank you for telling me, Lord Carstark. You did well to leave those men. I will monitor the situation, but Master Robert was a good choice for command. His king replied. How many did you leave in Harrenhal? Thank you, your grace. I left 1,000 under Sir Wylis Mandaly. All are men from his own Levi, so I expect no problems there. Good, very well done. His king responded. He nodded in thanks. How did the Westerlands campaign go? He asked. It went very well. As you probably know, we captured, in order, Ashmark, the Crag, Sarsfield, Stackspear and the Golden Tooth. My brother John performed very well, personally taking Sarsfield and giving Lords Glover and Umber the possibility to take Stackspear. My uncle Bryndon invented a plan to catch most of the Golden Tooth's garrison outside, after which I managed to flip some western nobles, most notably House Prester, until they opened the gates of the castle. After I might have managed to gain Lady Leford's friendship, not sure. His former foster son explained. He mused over what he had heard. It was all good news in truth. The last part intrigued him. How did you manage to gain her loyalty? She has a few cousins who are vying for her titles. 2 of them died in the battle where the garrison was drawn out. The others are being brought to the twins as captives, far away from the most powerful western nobles, while Lady Leford stays here in Riverrun with some important countrymen. We have managed to capture hundreds of nobles, most of them women and children of smaller noble houses, but some bigger fish as well. I am spreading them out across the northern and central Riverlands as we speak. That was good. Maybe Rob's plan for the Westerlanders to start abandoning Tywine would be possible with houses Prester and Leford already walking the line. What are your following plans? He asked. I am in the middle of raising the Levi of the entire Riverlands. I will scout out the border to the Reach while we march together to Harrenhal once everyone has been gathered. I will fortify the castle, but we have found a suitable place for battle not far away from it where we could repel a much larger army. If the Tyrells march, we could do something there. If they stay at King's Landing, I might send incursions into the Crown Lands and the Reach to bait parts of their army. Back to Harrenhal, your grace. We just came from there. He asked in surprise. Yes, back to Harrenhal, my lord. I planned this as a ruse to see how well the Lannisters and Tyrells will respond. Will they immediately send reinforcements to the Westerlands and the north of the Reach when they hear me gather at Riverrun? Will they march on me with their force? Or will they remain in the capital? I want to see how fast they'll react and in what numbers and capacity. His king explained, and he couldn't fault the idea. If I return to the raiding incursions, the Crown Lands especially have been forcefully emptied by Lord Tywine and is ripe for the taking. If they haven't marched before that point, Mace Tyrell's pride will force him to come after us to protect his daughter's new kingdom. We will be able to force them to do battle then. The only thing that gives me pause is the presence of Lords Tarly and Rowan. Both renowned and experienced commanders. He mused. After which he continued. No easy feat to defeat them. However, their morale is low. Especially the Westerlanders have been hit heavily. The Reach has suffered many casualties as well. The death of Sir Garland and many of its nobles will have hit heavily. Many of their Levi won't have been able to fight in the city yet and will be nothing more than flowery Southrons with fat bellies. If we force them on a tough campaign around the Riverlands, many will break or desert. HMMN, they might. I'll think about it. All depends on what the enemy will do now. We'll establish our position, fortify some castles to possibly retreat to and strengthen our supply lines. Once they make their move we will respond in kind. I have been making the first moves in all my campaigns, they will not expect this. Rob replied. They won't. He agreed. It was a risk, but what wasn't? They could still adapt their strategy once back in Harrenhal. Any other news I should know about? Yes, actually. We just received news from the Vale this morning. The other lords don't know yet, but I'll tell them tonight. And? He asked. The fighting is escalating. House Waxel's forces have been defeated by the combined army of House Redfort and part of House Royce's forces under Lord Yone's heir Sir Albar. Sir Edmund Waxel died in the fighting and much of his force was destroyed. His heir is a young boy, so the house is probably completely out of the war. His king started explaining. That was great news to hear. Not only was it one less enemy, it also was one less avenue of attack for the Vale enemies to attack. It would free many of the forces there. Just as he thought, his son-in-law continued. After the battle, the Red Forts joined the siege of the Uri. Together with these reinforcements, House Templeton, Hunter and Waynwood are preparing to attack the Arryn and Aegon army at the Bloody Gate, but no news has come from that battle yet. Sir Albar joined his father after the battle and he and his men have been turning the tides in the battles between Houses Royce and Grafton. Still no major battle has been fought, but the houses are continually having minor clashes all over the border. There isn't too much else of note to tell except maybe that the Belmares are still being delayed by the Corbrays. Lord Yone is starting to think they are secretly supporting the Arryns, but he has no proof as of that yet. Rob finished. Well, that's still good news. House Waxel out of the war and Houses Arryn, Aegon and Grafton severely on the back foot. If it continues like this, the war may be decided soon. He summarized. Let us hope so. Some detachments of the Knights of the Vale could greatly help our war effort. We'll see. As long as they win, I'll be happy. That'll be one less region for the Lannisters to try to corrupt. He replied, we just have to focus on defeating those fuckers now. Aelys' husband looked at him and there was a hidden strength in his eyes, but also doubt. Yes, we will have to do just that, Lord Ricard, just that indeed. Aye, my boy, and we will. He responded. Now, that all of that is out of the way, we can finally talk about what is important. Rob lifted his eyebrow. What is important? My new granddaughter Princess Edara. He smirked and the eyes of the man in front of him brightened as soon as he heard the name of his daughter. How do you feel about being a father? He asked his son-in-law. It feels great but also strange. It feels somewhat unreal, as I have never even seen my daughter before. Aelys writes me letters and tells me how she looks like, but it is not the same. I don't even know if I would be any good at being a father. Aelys does everything now. When I come home my daughter will not even know me. Aelys' husband replied honestly. He walked around the desk until he stood in front of his son-in-law. He placed his hand on his right shoulder and looked into his eyes. You're going to be a great father, Rob. I know this to be true. I have seen you with Aelys and with your siblings. You will do a fantastic job of it. In the meantime, Aelys will take care of everything together with your mother and your siblings. Aelys writes me they adore their little niece, especially young Princess Arya and Prince Brandon. They will tell Edara about you all the time. She might not know your face when you return, but she will know you. He said reassuringly. The man in front of him, who was in fact almost still a boy when it came to things like fatherhood and marriage, looked at him intently. He nodded, but at the same time something gave way behind his eyes then. He slumped in his chair and started talking, the sadness and vulnerability clear in his voice. Sometimes all I want to do is get on a horse and ride north, just leave all of this behind and go see my daughter. I never wanted this war, I still don't. I just wanted my family to be safe and to make father proud. Now father is dead, my family has been attacked at home and all the while I'm stuck here. At this rate, my daughter will be 2 or 3 years old when I return. She won't know who I am. He then did something he had never done to Rob before and hugged him fiercely. His king was totally caught off guard, but soon answered it just the same. After a small while, he took a step back as he rested both his hands on his former foster son's shoulders. Listen here, Rob. It's true you set out to keep your family safe and rescue your father. Well, your family is safe. I know what happened at Winterfell shook you, but the culprits are being hunted down as we speak. Winterfell has been reinforced and it will never happen again. Your family is safe. He responded resolutely. It has even grown since you left, as you have a wife and daughter who joined the Stark family. You, and we all with you, also set out to rescue your father, yes. He was a great lord and an even greater man. It was my privilege to serve him and an even greater one to call him my friend. He told the man in front of him, the last words said with a determination and sadness that even surprised himself. However, he isn't here anymore. All we can now do is avenge him and make sure everything he stood for is protected. He wanted the North strong, his family safe and honor and justice held up in a time of peace. The Lannisters threaten all of that. Do you think Tywin Lannister will rest before you, your siblings and daughter are dead? Maybe he'll even spare one of your sisters to marry her off to some Lannister cousin or the other. He'll destroy the North, exterminate your family and issue in an era without honor and constant wars and rebellions. He saw the man in front of him bristle at the mention of one his sisters married to a Lannister. Good, it didn't matter how it pained Robb to hear this or him to say this. Ned's son needed to hear this, because it was the sad and harsh truth. It was the world they would leave behind if they failed. If you give up now, the Lannisters won't have just killed the honorable and great Eddard Stark, they will have destroyed everything he ever stood for. They will try to destroy the northern culture at its roots. Your father will be nothing more than one body in a pile of Tywin's great accomplishments. Besides that, we will be more than likely be on top of that pile as well. The best thing you can do for your father, your daughter and your people is to fight this war and end it. No one will ever be safe as long as Tywin Lannister breathes. We will have to do battle and win, that's the only way to make sure your daughter will ever remember your name and that the people will ever remember your father's and all he ever stood for. He finished with a meaningful look. He saw how slowly the embers of determination and spirit returned in the eyes of his son-in-law. Soon those embers seemed to erupt into a great campfire. Robb looked at him with what could only be described as a feral expression. All the while, Grey Wind had joined next to him and the similarities in their faces were even scaring him a bit, although he would never admit to it of course. I will, Lord Karstark. Thank you for telling me this, I needed this. I will end Tywin Lannister and all he ever stood for, like he wants to do with my father. I will do this for my father and the daughter we named after him. I will break his legacy to pieces while he is forced to watch. I will end his line and make sure they never rule anything, be it Casterly Rock or that damned chair in King's Landing. I will make his destruction so complete that no one will ever talk about the reigns of Castameria anymore. Instead they'll only whisper about the silence on Tywin's unmarked grave. His king almost growled and for the first time he feared he had gone too far with the boy. That thought was quickly forgotten however, when he saw what happened next. He saw how the man in front of him straightened his back and took a step back, so his own arms fell from his shoulders. He fixed the bronze crown on top of his head and those blue eyes looked into his own with determination, while he stroked his direwolf's head. I'm sorry, Lord Rickard, but we'll have to postpone our reunion with Harry and To. I have work to do and a war to plan. If you would be so kind as to let the other lords know they are invited to a war council tonight. 1 hour before sunset will do it. You are of course also invited and bring Harry with you, if you will. Stunned, he looked towards the transformation that had taken place in front of him. The man in front of him had gone from an insecure boy, to an enraged son and father until he became a king. Looking into those determined blue eyes, he was sure now that Robb would be the one who would give them their northern independence back. Robb would restore their ways, who had slowly been snowed under by the Southrons' influences since the coming of the dragons. Those eyes might be deep tully blue, the look they gave him reminded him of the stories he had read of the kings of winter of old. He also knew another thing. He would do all he could to help him to make it happen. He would even give his own old life for it if need be. For at this moment, he truly believed Robb had it in him to give his children and grandchildren a better future than the one he and his father had had. A life where they needn't pay parts of their taxes to the south so they could organize flowery tourneys or squabble amongst each other. A life where the north took care of its own, a life wherein the Night's Watch would be strong and protect them from the wildlings and where all of them would be respected instead of being thought of as little more than savages by half the realm. Of course, Your Grace. If you have any need of me, you just have to call for me and I will be there. He said as he bowed his head slightly. Robb nodded at him, before he stood up from the desk and walked over to the table with maps of the Riverlands, documents detailing troop numbers and scout reports spread all over it. He lingered for a small moment, as he looked upon his king. After that he just turned around and left. All the while, he asked himself if he had given Robb the will to go on, or if it had been the other way around. Whatever the case, he knew he would follow that boy to the ends of the world and beyond. Chapter 35, Throwing Back the Squids. 299 AC. Harley's Hornwood. He walked from the rookery to the Lord Solar of Winterfell. Shouldn't it be named the King's Solar now? He asked himself. He shrugged and quickly opened the letter he had received from Maester Lewin. It was from Donella and he longed to go home again soon, but he couldn't. He read its contents, but nothing major stood out. The border was calm, the villages were being rebuilt and the taxes were once again flowing in as they should. Most of the lower nobles that stayed home didn't cause any trouble either. He sighed contentedly. His wife might have only been a Mondaily cousin, but she damn sure knew how to take care of business. Satisfied that his own home was doing well, he switched his thought onto the whole north. A lot of news had apparently come in and he was expected to be briefed by his queen and Lady Catelyn. He had been out to instruct patrols along the borders of the Wolf's Wood for the past 4 days and was eager to know of any news. He rounded a corner and admired the strong granite walls. Even from the inside they still looked formidable. Not long after he reached the door to the Solar. The 2 guards in front of it greeted him respectfully and he was soon allowed to enter after being announced. "Lord Hornwood, it is good of you to join us. Please, take a seat." Lady Catelyn offered him with a smile. He respectfully bowed his head to both her and his queen next to her before seating down. "Do you want anything to drink, my lord? Wine or ale? I can ask the servants to bring something to eat as well, would you wish it?" "Just some wine would be good, my lady," he responded. Soon a servant brought him a glass of red wine. He thanked both the servant and the king's mother, before taking a sip. It clearly wasn't from the arbor, but its flavors were rich nonetheless. After he put the glass down, he looked at the 2 women in front of him. "What news has there been when I was away?" He came right to business. "Many new developments have been heard, Lord Harleys," Queen Alis responded. "First concerning your mission, I suppose everything went as planned and that you found no Ironborn." He nodded. "That was exactly what had happened, but how could they know?" "We received word from House Woods, one of House Glover's major vassals. The Ironborn under Asher Greyjoy have been forced to the western portions of the Wolf's Wood. They tell me they are slowly being forced towards a perfect ambush location. The mountain clans have ambushed 2 of their foraging parties already and many of the Ironborn scouts have disappeared overnight, it is reported. It seems the Ironborn are both lost and out of supplies, we expect to hear of their defeat in the next week or so," his queen said evenly, although a small smile betrayed her thoughts on the matter. "That is great news, Your Grace. I will look forward to the day the news arrives," he said honestly. Those Ironborn scum had had it their way for far too long. It was time they met some northern vengeance. "Aye, it is." The young woman now openly smiled. "However, that is not all. There is more joyous news to report on the Ironborn. It seems Theon Greyjoy and his remaining men have managed to link up with his sister's force inside the Wolf's Wood. If all goes well, both will be dead or captured before the fortnight is over." He took this information with a nod. It wasn't that surprising, to be honest. The squid had disappeared into the woods some time ago. Still, it was good news all the same that he was finally boxed in as well. "A good squid is a dead squid, Your Grace," he replied simply. "If that is what you believe, the next news will elate you, my lord." Lady Catelyn joined in. He looked questioningly at her. What did she mean by that? "A raven came 3 days ago, Balon Greyjoy is dead," she explained with clear satisfaction in her eyes. Now he looked at her in complete and utter shock. "He's dead?" "Aye," his queen replied with glee, "but it keeps getting better. His death corresponded with the arrival of his banished brother Euron Greyjoy. The man has taken control of Pike and apparently drowned Lord Botley. With both of Balon's heirs trapped in the Wolf's Wood, Aeron Greyjoy has called for a king's moot to decide on Balon's heir. All the Greyjoys that are able to, are leaving our shores to fight amongst themselves over Balon's crown." He tried to process all he had heard. The king of the Iron Isles had died, which was great news. However, the return of the brigand Euron Greyjoy wasn't. It was clear both Stark ladies underestimated the man. Still, Greyjoy's leaving was interesting, so he decided to focus on that first. Who is leaving and with how many? Aeron Greyjoy has left with the few ships he had. They were raiding along the coast of the northern parts of the Stony Shore and a little beyond. Reports from small local houses say they have left. Much more significant is the fact Victorian Greyjoy has left Moat Cailin. Lady Catelyn explained. As he heard the last news, he immediately sat straight. Now this was interesting. Victorian left. Are you sure? He responded very seriously. Yes, the report from House Dustin have been very clear. Most of the Ironborn fleet has been seen sailing away. Among them was the Iron Victory, Victorian's own flagship. Lady Catelyn explained. Most of the Ironborn fleet left as well. How many? He asked in complete surprise once again. The news kept getting better and better with every answer, and he couldn't believe his own ears. They couldn't say, but it was estimated that close to 100 ships left. Queen Alis explained, before Lady Catelyn could reply. He chose to ignore the obvious competition between the two Stark women and thought about the news. That many ships meant most of the Iron Fleet and its soldiers were gone. That would leave only a few hundred men left in Moat Cailin. Still, a formidable obstacle due to the protection of the fortress, but not impossible to take from the north or west. He ignored everything around him and stood up, walking towards the maps with troops that were displayed on the table behind him. Lord Harley's? Lady Catelyn asked him. He was of a mind to ignore her, but he obviously couldn't, so he simply replied. Just a moment, my lady. I need to take a look at the troops' positioning once again before I formulate my idea. He looked towards all the pieces on the map and added those he knew had switched positions or been recently raised. He looked around the map. His mind was racing. The Sowins have 250 men left. Winterfell could only send 100 if they didn't want a repeat of last time's ambush. He himself had 300 here. The Marndaelis had over 500, the Ryswells were busy, but the Dustins should have some more. Maybe the Reeds could help. He looked over all the pieces and keeps on the board as his mind kept adding the numbers. Suddenly he remembered something. Robert Glover had been left at the Twins with another 2,000 men. This could work. 2,000 south of the moat and between 1 and 1,500 men north of it. Would that be enough? It could be. Worst case scenario, couldn't he siege them out? He thought it all over again. Lord Harley's, may I ask what plan you might be considering? His queen finally said, disturbing his thoughts. He looked up and saw that both women were becoming very impatient. I'm sorry, Your Grace and my lady. I was looking over the troops and the numbers, and I think we might be able to take Moat Cailin back once and for all. Now it was their turn to look stunned. Are you sure? You only have a few hundred men here that could march. You would only slightly outnumber the Ironborn, and they hold the fortress, a considerable advantage. Aye, Your Grace, it is. That's why we need more troops, but they are available. We have my men, those from House Sowin and a small portion of Castle and Stark men, but also more. House Marndaeli could raise at least 500 and House Dustin could levi some as well. In total we would have between 11 and 1,500 men to my estimation. Both women looked at him, trying to crunch the numbers. At last both nodded, so he continued. The biggest game changer is Robert Glover with 2,000 men on the other side. If he marches up the causeway, he will distract most of the Ironborn's attention. We might even send Worth to Lord Reed to help as well. He and his Cranogman could harry the Ironborn from the bogs and help Robert in his advance. Even if the assault fails, we could still starve them out from all sides until they surrender. He explained, feeling quite proud of himself for the plan. Lady Catelyn and his queen looked at each other before looking back at him. Are you sure of this? They asked him seriously. He nodded. The more he thought about it, the surer he was. This could be a game changer. If we open Moat Cailin, we can finally send aid to Robb. He could also start sending some of the loot up north. With it, we could start fortifying the north against another Ironborn assault. Queen Alis summed up. It was clear she liked the idea. Lady Catelyn was more reserved. She asked him again if he was sure and checked all the details with him. After a while she finally relented. "We will ask Sir Roderick to take a look at your plan, but it seems good. If everything checks out, you and Sir Roderick can start planning the campaign out. We will write the letters to houses Marndaly, Selwyn, Dustin and Reed as well. Robert Glover at the Twins will also be ordered to move north." He nodded thankfully. He knew the old lady of Winterfell put a lot of trust in the castle knight. He didn't mind too much, as the man was a good commander and they worked well together. He prepared to leave, but Queen Alis stopped him. "We almost forgot, there has been some more news as well." "What news?" he asked. "Roger Risswell, the heir to his house, has raised a band of troops and defeated around 100 Ironborn raiders on his border with the Stony Shore," his queen explained. "That's good news. It means the Ironborn are paying for their raiding all along the coast. They will think twice before attacking us again." He looked over the map and noticed the remaining presence of Ironborn on the Stony Shore. "With your agreement, Your Grace and my lady, I would request you immediately send a letter to Roger Risswell to unite with Leopold Tallheart. Together they could drive the remaining Ironborn force from the Stony Shore. This would have the doubled benefit of finally stabilizing the region, as well as cutting off the last remaining possible retreat for Asher and Theon Greyjoy." Both ladies agreed with him. He bowed low and left the room. Pleased with all they had planned and agreed. Soon the Ironborn in the north would be no more. 10 days later. He sat straight on his horse and smelled the cold afternoon air. They had departed from Castle Selwyn a few days ago. 650 men strong they marched down the King's Road. Any moment now, Sir Marlon Marndaly would join them. Some Dustins would as well, but they would ambush the Ironborn ships on the Salt Spear first. Last they heard, Roger Risswell had reached Torrens Square. Soon this Dagmar Clefture and his men would be no more. The north would be rid of those godless pillagers. That would leave only the Boltons as a possible threat. He had sworn that Roose Bolton would pay his due. However, as of yet, that had been impossible. The vile man still commanded over 1,000 men in the king's army and his grace needed them. Still, his treasonous bastard and his cronies had been beaten back and the greatest threat had passed for now. While at Winterfell, he had made arrangements that the bastard would pay if he ever entered his lands again. He kept thinking about his home and his lovely wife, until finally her cousin's banners were seen on the horizon. He greeted Sir Marlon happily. Ever since the fight at the Hornwood, they got along well. "I have brought you another 600 men from my lordly cousin, Lord Harley's," he had said. This took their force to more than 1,200 soldiers. They set up camp, some 2 days marching from Moat Cailin. Scout reports came in that night. It seemed the Ironborn had some 300 to 400 men left in the castle. Lord Reed was already hunting down their scouts and foragers that wandered too deep into the swamp. They also received news that Lady Dustin's men had succeeded in burning the ships along the Salt Spear. Soon her 300 men would join them as well. All the while, Lord Reed also reported that Robert Glover had reached the beginning of the causeway. In a few days he would reach the moat from the south side and their attack could commence. The raider scum didn't know what would hit them. His orders had already come in. All of them would be offered one choice, execution or the wall. None of these would ever get the possibility to take up arms against the north again. Rob. He had been looking over his maps all morning. 30,000 men had been gathered beneath the red sandstone walls of Riverrun. Riverlanders and Northmen alike, both eager and ready to fight. The morale was reasonably high, the equipment of high quality and the supply lines ready and secure. They would leave on the morrow. He would lead the main force, while he had already chosen the other commanders. His uncle Brynden would lead the scouts and outriders, the vanguard would be given to his father-in-law and the rear to Lord Blackwood. He wanted to balance out the Riverlands and North as much as he could, and the people of the area already knew Lord Rickard. Before he left, however, his affairs needed to be in order. He had already dealt with everything he needed to do in the Riverlands. The death of his grandfather had given them much pause, but most of it had been arranged by the combination of him and his two uncles. His uncle Edmure would remain in Riverrun and take control of the communication and supply lines. Their shared uncle, the famous Blackfish, would lead the Riverland forces. He had also fixed the situation in the west. Small forces were building up there and the garrison at the crag could never hold. As such, he had recalled Sir Free and his men straight to Harrenhal. He had also instructed Lord Vance to reinforce the Golden Tooth with an additional 200 men and ordered OS to leave Ashmark and retreat to the Tooth if he felt he could not hold his position. All that left him with, was the north. Many things were developing there, for once all of it was good news. The Greyjoys trapped in the Wolf's Wood, Moat Cailin almost under siege from all sides, raiders being picked off all along the stony shore. The first phase of the war with the Ironborn was almost at an end. What the second phase would be, he didn't know yet. Either they hold them up in their islands again, leading petty raids but not much else until he was ready to bring his vengeance to them, or they launched a renewed offensive. He was ready for both scenarios. The clans had 3,000 men around the Wolfwood, the Riswells, Dustins, Glovers and Tall Hearts were fortifying their coasts and castles and another big force was gathering around Moat Cailin. As long as the fortress didn't fall a second time, they would be fine. He had already sent a message to make Lord Harleys the Castellan of Moat Cailin until the end of the war, if they managed to take it. A force of his own men, Dustin soldiers and Stark troops would be under his command to do so. He was given leave to fortify the fortress in any way he saw fit as well. He hoped it would be enough. Less than 10 minutes ago, Maester Vireman had delivered him a letter from Winterfell. He had expected word about the battle in the Wolf's Wood for many days now and was glad he received it before he left. He had asked both the Umber families and Lord Glover with him and would wait to open the letter until they were here. Asher Greyjoy had sacked the Glover lands and threatened his family. For the Umbers it was twofold, the Great Yon's own uncle was in the fight but Theon was too. The whole family wanted revenge for the death of Alera and they deserved to know before anyone else. Not much after, both lords joined him. They had to wait a while longer until both the Great Yon's sons, Smalljan and Harmond, and his two brothers, Osric and Roderick, arrived. They came from all sides of the camp but finally made it. When all got a seat around the table, he sat down at the head with Grey Wind lazily sprawled next to him under the table. He picked up the letter and opened the wax with his dagger. Recognizing that it was not her handwriting but Maester Lewin's, he let out a small sigh before reading aloud. To His Grace, King Rob. News has come about the battle in the Wolf's Wood. The entire Greyjoy force has been ambushed and defeated. 800 died in the fighting and some 150 were captured, among them Asher and Theon Greyjoy. The former was knocked out during the fight and the latter has received a serious wound on his right arm, he might lose it. The northern casualties are minimal, around 100 men dead or seriously wounded. The clans have agreed that the prisoners will be given the choice of execution or the wall. This has sparked a lot of internal strife as Lord Hodder Umber wanted them all put to the sword and crucified all along the Sunset Coast, the Greyjoys chiefly among them. Lord Hugo Val has stopped this and taken the Greyjoys into protected custody. The Umbers have left in rage back to Last Hearth. They will take care of the area and the local population that has felt the Greyjoy presence in the Wolfwood. After that they will march back to Deepwood Motte and fortify the castle. There they will wait on your instructions. The same day we received this news, we also got word from Leopold Tallheart. He and Roger Riswell have ambushed the 300-strong force of raiders under Dagmar Clefture on the stony shore. They inform me that none have survived. Most of their ships have been burned, while 3 of them are being sailed along the coast to Barrowton and Torrens Square for their own use. Maester Lewin. He looked up after reading this and already the Umbers were talking heatedly amongst themselves. He quickly decided to deal with Lord Glover first. Lord Galbart, it seems your lands are free from the Ironborn at last. Your keep and family are safe, and the clans will reinforce it even further. He said, while he forced a smile on his face. The only forced part of it was him trying to ignore the Umbers next to the loyal Glover Lord. Yes, it is amazing news, Your Grace. I thank you for dealing with it so decisively. I will thank the clans for it as well when I return. The man said with a smile that was much more genuine than his own. First of all, I want to thank you and your kin, Great Yon. Your men were also present, and your uncle devised the plan that put an end to those Ironborn. House Glover won't forget that. This made all the Umbers look up. It was a very intelligent move from his vassal and could help soften the mood around Hodder Umber. Their giant lord looked respectfully towards Lord Galbart. The two had always had a reasonable relationship. I thank you for the kind words, Galbart. Our houses have had good relations for a long time now, so don't think much about it. I'm sure killing Ironborn scum was more than payment enough for Hother. Then he turned towards me. Why are the clans offering those common raiders the chance to take the black? My uncle is right, they should be hanged from the wall down to Cape Kraken to show the Ironborn what happens when they set foot on our lands. The two Greyjoys' heads would do well on the stony shore, as they like to raid those parts even more than others. First of all, because the Night's Watch is weaker than it has ever been, Lord Umber. House Umber is the closest house to the wall, so you should know this even better than me. The once proud organization has less than 1,000 men left. All West AOC prisoners will get a chance to join them out of necessity. He responded. He looked over the faces of all the Umbers gathered as he said this. It was clear Smalljan and one of the Great Yon's brother agreed it with him, however the others' blood still ran hot. Secondly, concerning the Greyjoys, they are nobles, even royalty if you believe Balon's crowning. They can be used to enforce peace with the Iron Isles. We'll send them a message that if they send another force into the north both theirs will die. By doing so, we can enforce peace in the north until the war in the south is finished. In the meantime, we will reinforce our shores and lands until we are ready. He finished evenly. This met fierce reaction from all the Umbers, except Smalljan. While his kin was busy shouting and cursing, he stared deep into his own eyes. It wasn't really a surprise, as his friend knew him far better than the others. After apparently having found something in his eyes, the Umber heir's voice boomed over everyone else. Ready? Until we are ready for what? He smiled at his friend, as he looked over all the other Umbers until they quieted down. Until we are ready to sail a fleet right up to the Iron Isles and smash Pike, House Greyjoy and the old way to pieces like Robert Baratheon should have done a decade ago. Now they all just stared at him, until Lord Umber's booming laughter finally pierced the air. I should have known. King Stark here won't let us down. Any idea when we will be ready? Harmond Umber asked, eager to avenge his little sister. No, I don't. First, we'll have to defeat both the Lannisters and Tyrells and bring some resemblance of order to the Riverlands and its border areas. Then we will need to procure a fleet and get rid of the Iron Fleet. Only then will we be ready. Until that time, we will use every raider that sets foot in the north as either reinforcements for the wall or to feed the crows on our fields. He responded with determination. He had no clue how this would take place, but he would try anyway. The Ironborn had always preyed on his homeland and they were the sole reason the western coast was underdeveloped. If he wanted to change the lives of his people for the better, that needed to change, and as such something needed to be done about those islands. Still, the Lannisters and the safety of the Riverlands had priority, and so they had to wait. The Umbers didn't look entirely happy with his honest answers, but they seemed to realize there weren't any other options. After a little small talk, his nobles left him to his own thoughts. Over a week later, he was sitting in the solar of House Went in Harrenhal. The solar had been almost entirely redecorated by his father-in-law after the Lannisters had left, and so he found himself in what could be described as a cheap knockoff of the solar in Carhold. Their march had been uneventful, but the rest of the world hadn't stood still. He had postponed all correspondence when they arrived in the early evening yesterday. Now, yesterday's procrastination forced him to go through all of it. Luckily, he wasn't alone. He had asked John, Lord Rickard and Sir Brynden to sit in with him as advisors. The first letter was sent from Greywater's watch. It had been sent to Riverrun, but a rider had made it in the early morning here with some correspondence. He read the lines and smiled in satisfaction. It seems that Moat Cailin is finally under siege. The attack is imminent. Lord Howland has already been lowering the Ironborn's numbers by constantly attacking their foragers and scouts. One time the Ironborn were stupid enough to send 40 men after a few of his scouts. They managed to lure them into an ambush. None got away. All men looked pleased at that. His brother replied. Lord Howland Reed was a good friend of father, was he not? He nodded in response, clearly remembering his father's vague story about how Howland had saved his life in the rebellion. I always wanted to meet him, but he never came to Winterfell. John continued, I never understood why. Lord Rickard waved his hand through his beard as he responded slowly. HMMN, the Crannog men have always been distant and more focused on themselves. Many stories about them are told in the north and I suppose in the Riverlands too. The last he added as he looked questioningly to the Blackfish, who agreed with the statement. Howland had been an exception in his youth. Before his father died and he became lord, he travelled quite a lot. He travelled to the tourney at Harrenhal, where he met your father, aunt and uncles. After that he even took a company of Crannog men with him to fight with your father. Cregan and I were there too and I spoke to him often on campaign. A peculiar man, as I suppose all Crannog folk are. However, one thing can never be doubted. He is fiercely loyal to House Stark and was especially so to your father and Aunt Lyanna. The two of them were the only ones to return with her bones after the war. He finished deep in thought. Since his return after the war, Howland has never again left the Neck. He is noted to have visited his own vassals regularly and married one of their daughters. A few years after the war, his father died. He became the lord of his house and became even more secluded. All I know from him is that he has 2 children, a boy and a girl. At least the girl is close to marriageable age, but no offers to any houses have been made to my knowledge. I guess the seclusion of the Crannog men will persist and that she will marry one of her own people. His father-in-law explained, shrugging at the end of it. He thought about that. The Reeds had always loyally followed his father and his forefathers before that. They hadn't sent any troops with him south, but he doubted that was where their strengths lay. The fact that they were both hunting Ironborn and briefing him on the situation, was enough for him to conclude they were still loyal to him. He would really like to talk to Lord Howland and look at a possible way to include the people of the Neck more into his realm. They lived in the middle between the Riverlanders and the Northerners. If he wanted his realm to be more united, he couldn't have them living in between with no connection to the outside world. Lord Reed also personally intrigued him. He could probably tell them stories about their father they never knew before. Things they never would have heard as kid but could learn from as adults. Thank you, Lord Ricard. I will look the situation with House Reed over at another time. Until then, the more important thing is that soon the causeway and the gate to the north will be back under our control. He finally said when his thought process ended. That's the most important thing. We could also send down some of those levies we had been talking about some months ago. In the very least the 2,000 veterans under Robert will be very useful. Maybe 1 or 2,000 recruits as well. It would greatly bolster our ranks. That would be good. We will look that over once the moat has fallen. He finished the conversation. He looked at the pile of other letters. He opened 2 of them but nothing new was in it, so he discarded them quickly. The third one bore the seal of House D'Ari. He read it over. It seemed Sir Raymond D'Ari would finally be joining him. For months he had been stuck in his keep and had secluded himself. He had managed to fend off a few raiding parties from when the Lannisters were in Harrenhal but hadn't done much more than raise his levy and protect his own lands. Lord Ricard shared that he had aided them with guides and food when he had marched on Maidenpool but that he hadn't joined them with any troops, just like House Root had done. He knew the D'Aris had no reason to be fond of his mother's house. Them joining now, even when the situation with House Tyrell was dire, was a good sign. Moreover, he was marching with more than 1,000 men at his back and would be here in 2 days. This would take his total force to around 33,000 men. A little under 14,000 Northmen, the rest Riverlanders. He thought about how he left with over 20,000 from the north and now less than 70% of those remained. He calmed down when he realized Robert Glover commanded another 2,000 of his original force. Besides that, Lord Hornwood had also taken hundreds north as well, while OS had 500 in the west. Calmed down, he moved on to the next letter. To his surprise it bore the Golden Lion of House Lannister. He quickly told his advisors and they all bent forward in their seats, as he started reading aloud. To Lord Robb Stark. The good King Joffrey Baratheon has seen it fit to offer you peace. He is prepared to forgive your rebellious tendencies and allow all of you to retain your titles. Your father's bones will also be returned to you as a sign of goodwill after signing the agreement. In return, he demands you turn over all your hostages and loot, abandon the Westerlands and come to King's Landing to swear fealty as the Lord Paramount of the North. He will recognize your claims and help condemn the Ironborn invasion. His Grace has also shown an interest to marry your youngest sister to his brother and heir Prince Tommen. Do not destroy the Riverlands anymore in a fight you cannot win. Accept this fair peace deal for the sake of the people and the kingdom. Lord Tywin Lannister. Lord of Casterly Rock, Shield of Lannisport, Warden of the West and Hand of the King. He looked stunned at the letter. This couldn't be serious, could it? They had been winning this war, had ravaged almost half of Tywin's homeland and retaken all of the Riverlands. His heir was in his custody and his army decimated, and he dares to call this a fair peace deal. Most of his advisors looked equally stunned, while his uncle just scoffed. Ha, the old lion is getting desperate. He turned towards the Blackfish. How do you mean, uncle? Tywin Lannister would never offer peace. He basically allows you to retain the situation before the war. It's my guess that he is anxious about his bloodline and his legacy. I think he wants the Kingslayer back, especially after he lost his hand. If you also take into account the instability that we have created in the West with all the hostages and the fact his Tyrell alliance is very unbalanced, you get why he's doing this. He thought about that and had to agree with it. He was going to leave it there, until Jon joined in. If his alliance with the Tyrells is so unbalanced and it is true that the fight at the capital was as brutal as they say, couldn't it be that he is also stalling for time? You think he wants us to stall and bog down in peace negotiations while he reorganizes his forces and gets the Tyrells in line? Lord Rickard asked. It's what I would do. Our scouts even tell stories of a planned wedding. It might be that he is stalling until after that. It could ensure the Tyrell support and would leave their armies and commanders free to engage us. As he saw how his most experienced commanders agreed with it, he tended to do the same. I agree, but how do we react? Now Sir Brynden peeked up with a smile. If he wants to give us an outrageous peace offer, let's return our own. What do you propose? His father-in-law asked. The Blackfish's grin became broader and broader. Well, let's say our independence for starters. We keep all the loot, demand outrageous sums of money for all the prisoners, maybe the annexation of the Golden Tooth and Prince Tommen as a hostage to ensure the peace. Let us say we want to examine him first before we formalize a betrothal with Arya. Due to his incestuous parents he could have crazy tendencies. They would need to understand our reluctance because of that. He looked in shock at his uncle before he started laughing out loud. He was soon joined by Jon and Lord Rickard. If you include the incest part, I can live with that offer. The latter laughed. That's settled then. I'll write it up later. He shrugged. Wait, brother, are you serious? Jon asked. Yes, why not? That incestuous freak killed our father and usurped his friend's throne. He plunged the whole continent in multiple wars and all accounts tell us he is good on his way to become Aerys III. If they wish to insult us, we do it back at them and we don't even need to lie about it. He simply replied. His brother looked at him completely stunned, before nodding seriously. It was clear he agreed with the sentiment. Who will you send as messenger? His father-in-law asked, suddenly concerned. There is a good chance that man won't be coming back. He waved that comment off. I'll add a line at the bottom that the Kingslayer's life depends on the safety of the messengers. This seemed to calm Lord Rickard. He continued and opened a few more letters. Mostly routine information or scout reports where it said that all was quiet. There was also a personal letter from Aelys, but he would read that when he was alone. One of those scout reports dealt with the ruins of Maidenpool. Do you want to reinforce or rebuild the castle? His uncle asked him. He knew the man was quite fond of the boy lord of House Mouton. In time. But not now. We will just lose men and resources in doing so. I don't want us to spread out too much. I wouldn't put it past either Tywin Lannister or Randyll Tarly to pounce on us then. He responded. This answer seemed satisfactory. Soon they had reached the last letter. It bore the bronze shield of House Royce. This intrigued him, as he hadn't expected more news this soon after the last report a few weeks ago. To King Robb Stark. I bring ill tidings from the Vale. It seems the Lannisters have finally joined Lysa's faction in the civil war. Littlefinger has arrived in Gulltown with a combined force of mercenaries and reachmen under Lord Ashford. In total some 8,000 men arrived from King's Landing, but word has it that he is contacting sellsword companies from across the narrow sea. How he did it no one knows. We expected the Baratheons to close the Blackwater Bay, but it seems this hasn't happened. Sadly, this isn't the only bad news. Baelish has also bribed multiple Vale houses to his bastard son's side. The Corbrays and Sunderland's betrayal will pose a real problem. Already fighting has broken out along the Corbray and Belmore border. Besides that, he has also managed to convince the small island houses of Upcliff, Pryor and Elisham to join him, and they are mustering their small forces. He has complete naval control now and can easily move his troops up and down the coast to fight where we are weakest. This concerns me greatly. My own men were very clearly winning the war against House Grafton before they arrived. As such, our lands are secure for now and we will hold back the main force until the others can come to our aid. However, we would ask you to send any help you can. If houses Sunderland, Elisham and Pryor unite with the Corbrays and Lindeleys, we could lose the whole northern part of the Vale and be encircled. Jon Royce, Lord of Runestone and loyal vassal to the memory of Jon Arryn. Stunned, he looked at the letter. Really? Every time something seemed to work out, the whole situation turned against him and his allies once more. He couldn't believe it. His advisors looked as stunned as him. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of Sir Bryndon's silent curses. Littlefinger's actions changed everything. It made reinforcements from the Vale against the Lannisters almost impossible. What are we going to do about this? Can we actually help them? Jon asked. He stroked his beard for a while before he got up and walked over to a chest. He started rummaging through it until he found a map of the Vale and one of the Bight. He spread them on the table above the other ones and all looked at it. So which lords have joined Littlefinger, uncle? He asked the Blackfish. The man got up and walked around the table until he stood next to him. He first pointed his finger towards Hart's home. The Corbrays are here. They are a strong and proud house. They will directly oppose the Belmores and with the help of the Lindeleys they could beat them. If they do so, Coldwater Burn is in mortal danger. Another possibility is that they march along the coast. As such they could threaten the gathered allies at the Eyrie in the back. He sighed and so did Jon, but they didn't interrupt Sir Bryndon. The next house is House Sunderland. He explained, as he pointed towards the sisters. They are mediocre in strength but support a small navy. They could easily harass the Coldwaters and make it unable for them to help the Belmores. After the Coldwaters' earlier defeat, they might even be able to put their keep under siege. The last houses are very small. They hail from these 3 islands. The only problem is that they can harass our allies in their own lands very easily. House Hunter and Royce especially, but they could even go upriver and attack the lands of House Waynwood and House Redfort. They won't be strong enough to siege the castles, but it could be enough to put pressure on the alliance. His uncle finished in an annoyed tone. Is the Vale lost then? With over 8,000 men, maybe more, around Gulltown? Lord Rickard asked. Hard to say really. The Royces can muster thousands of men on their own. They might be able to hold them off for a while. If they can hold them long enough until the Redforts and others defeat the Arryns and Egens at the Bloody Gate, they have a good chance still. A token force of around 1,000 could siege out the Eyrie, while the others march south and help what's left of the Royces. Still, if the Corbrays and Lindeleys move up the coast and attack Longbow Hall, the Hunters will abandon the alliance. From there on out everything will fall apart quickly. He finished, concern written all over the veteran Tully's face. So, we need them to win at the Bloody Gate quickly and need to hope the Belmores can defeat the Corbrays. Jon summarized. Yes, that's about it. His uncle agreed. Maybe we could help with the latter. Lord Rickard added, deep in thought. As always when he was thinking, he was stroking his beard. A habit he himself had since taken to, it seemed, as he noticed his own hand in his beard at the same time. The Mandaelis are building a fleet, are they not? His father-in-law asked. Yes, but it isn't finished yet. He responded, not knowing where this was going. Well, when it is finished, could we send it to capture the sisters? Maybe the smaller islands further along as well. This would allow the Coldwaters to join the fight and stop the raiding from happening. It could also be a shock to morale if we join and take out some of their houses. The Lord of Carhold explained his plan. That could work, but with what men? He asked, not seeing them anywhere. After Moat Cailin falls we could send the Mandaealis and a portion of the other men. The Mandaealis have over 500 men there. Lord Ricard responded. But we can't send Robert Glover and his men. We need those reinforcements here. We are already outnumbered too badly, and without Vale support we'll need them. A while ago we spoke about adding 1,000 more recruits. We can't go from over 3,000 to less than 2. He added, and all agreed. What about the Flint and Lock men? John suddenly asked. What about them? Well, they have been raising and training a few hundred men themselves to send south towards us. Those could be sent with the Mandaealis. Together they should have some 1,000 men. It will be tricky to deal with Sisterton, but if they can sink the Sunderland ships it should be possible. John responded. He looked it all over. Yes, that could work. He thought aloud. Lord Ricard then joined in once more. The troops with Robert are from houses Sewin, Glover and the Flints of Widow's Watch. If we send the latter veterans with their recruits, that force could number over 1,500 men. Robert's forces could then be augmented by Sewin, Stark and Castle men to around its original strength. Most of those are veterans from the fighting in the Hornwood and around Torrens Square. We wouldn't lose any real experience. He looked it all over and crunched the numbers in his head. That could work. I also had news that the Flints of Flint's Finger have sent 300 to join Lord Hornwood in his attack. Those could either move south as well afterwards. It would give me the opportunity to send the Winterfell men home. I don't want a repeat of what happened with Theon Greyjoy. He responded, as he spat out the latter's name. All nodded then, the mood in the room slightly lifted. If we can hold off the Corbrays and Lindaleys in the north, the Royces and their friends have a good fighting chance. Their opponents are Reachman levies and not the strongest beside. Added to that are unreliable sellswords. Defeat them or bog them down and they will desert faster than you can count them. Let's hope so. We could see if they can raid the lands of those houses after securing the islands. This will be all for today, I think. I have some personal correspondence to catch up with. He finished the meeting. His uncle got up first, nodded to them all and left. John walked over to Ghost by the fire and scratched him behind his ears. Get up, buddy. We're leaving for today. You can play with Grey some more tonight. He heard him say. Soon the white direwolf stood up and together they walked out. Lord Ricard was the last one to walk out. With his hand on the door, he turned around and winked at him. Give my daughter my regards. My granddaughter too, while you're at it. As the last words were said, a small smile spread around his mouth. I will. He smiled back tiredly. His father-in-law left and he finally picked up the letter Alice had written him. He couldn't wait to hear about his daughter anymore. Every time he read his wife's letters, he felt almost as if he was there with them, almost. Chapter 36, Wolves and Vipers. 299/300 AC. John. He was sitting in Harrenhal Solar with Rob. Not for the first time he thought about how the Solar looked more northern than anything else. He guessed he had Lord Ricard to thank for that. It was nice in some way. He missed his home and his siblings. He also missed White Harbour. They had been south for almost a year now and everything that made him think fondly of home was a good thing now. At least he had Rob. He didn't know if either of them could do this without the other. He was also really glad for Ghost that he had Grey Wind. His loyal companion also deserved his brother alongside him. Ghost never made a sound, but it was still clear to see he enjoyed his packmate's presence. Thinking about Ghost, he slowly shut his eyes for a brief moment. He pulled on the thread in the back of his mind that he had slowly identified as his connection to Ghost. For a split second he smelled pine trees, moss and an animal scent he immediately knew to be deer. Ghost was out hunting. He wasn't alone either. He felt the presence of another big beast to his left and judging by Ghost's reaction he was no threat. A quick sniff later told him it was his brother. He opened his eyes and was once more in the Solar. Rob looking at him curiously. Ghost. He asked him quietly. He responded. Is Gray with him? His brother asked and he nodded in response. Good, I'm still having difficulty controlling it as good as you do. It usually works in the mornings, but once I get more tired it is hard to find him sometime. Rob explained. You worry too much, brother. With the campaign, the politics, your family and all your other plans, it is too much to focus on your abilities. It will come, just like it did with me. I'm still only now getting the hang of it. He smiled back and his brother just nodded absently. Where are they? To the west of here, hunting deer in the woods. I don't think we'll need to ask the men to prepare a meal for them tonight. They'll catch their prey soon. He responded, thinking about the smell of the animal that still vaguely ran in his nose. That's good, one less thing to worry about. Why do you think we can do it? Rob asked. I honestly don't know. I've tried to read everything I could about it, but there isn't much to find about it in the south. I only found a few vague books in the library of the crag about warging. I think the south has mostly forgotten about it. We will need to look for more information in the north. Father's library will have more information and maybe others, like the mountain clans or Cranogmen, can tell us even more. He responded. There might be another place, where they know more. His brother said, more to himself than to him as he walked over to the window. He walked over to him and then saw where he was looking to. The lake and the island in it. You mean the Isle of Faces? He asked. Rob nodded. It always intrigued me, but it was always so far away. Now it just lies there, but no one visits. It seems the closer you get, the bigger the mystery becomes. We could go there. He responded. Not now. Who knows what they'll tell us? Or what we'll learn? How long would we be there? More importantly, what would the men think? No, we can't do it now. I need to command without distractions. I understand. He responded. However, we could still go there, after the war has ended. He said hopefully. His brother looked at him and he seemed tired. After the war we can visit. He sighed. However, that is still far away. Now we have our present problems to deal with. He ended the conversation. What do we do about the Tarly situation? Lord Randall Tarly had marched north from King's Landing with 25,000 men over a week ago. He had marched as far as Duskendale but had halted there. He was busy keeping the Crownlander houses under his foot. Most had lost nobles in the fighting in the capital, often their lords or heirs and most of their men as well. They weren't keen on following the Lannisters any longer. Still, Tarly's presence and the fear he instilled seemed to change that, as they were now falling in line once more. Their raids could also have something to do with that. For the last 2 weeks, Rob had sent raiding bands deep into the Crownlands to raid. It all worked in a similar way as he had done in the Westerlands, but with a lot more restraint. They couldn't afford any sieges and the commanders needed to be a lot more cautious. In the west they had defeated their opposing army before raiding, now they tried to bait it into coming after them with raids. As such, his brother had only sent some of his most trustworthy commanders. All groups had existed out of Carstark, Umber or Tully troops, with their respective members as commanders. Harry on Carstark had burned Southhorn, killing Sir Richard Hogg, its master, and his nephew in the process. Similarly, Sir Brynden, Smalljon, Greatjon, Torren and Lord Ricard had taken other holdfasts. They were all small and relatively insignificant, however they served as an incentive for the Tyrells to march towards them. It seemed the plan had worked, but not entirely how they wanted it to. They had wanted to draw the big army, or at least part of it towards them. There were favorable lands around Harrenhal where they could offer them battle. The area had been scouted already and the trap was prepared. Only, their enemy didn't follow. When Tarly finally marched north, they thought they had him. It wasn't the huge army they had hoped for, but defeating these 25,000 would still have been a massive blow to the enemy alliance. However, the man never intended to confront them. Since his arrival in Duskendale, he had sent out scouts to locate their warbands and garrisons to reinforce the other border keeps but nothing more. Now he was starting to send his own warbands after ours. Already Smalljan had reported a clash in which he had lost 23 men before they had been able to retreat properly. More of these clashes would soon follow, that they all knew. He looked at the maps and letters again. He's trying to do the same thing we are doing. He is trying to get us out of our position and on a field of his choosing. All the while our raiding bands clash with their counter groups. We have nothing to win from this. We still have groups of bandits and broken men running around Maidenpool and Solpans. Maybe Tali will even try to recruit them. The ruins of Maidenpool are rumored to be the home of a bandit lord called the Red Raper. I don't suppose I need to explain the name. He might have as much as 300 men around him. It's more important that we deal with him than those pesky nightly houses along the Crownland border. Rob looked at him in surprise. It was true that he didn't usually vocalize his opinions like this, but it was true in this case and he wouldn't back down. They stared into each other's eyes for a while, until finally his brother relented. You're right. We got what we wanted, part of the army out of the capital. I will send word to the commanders to pull back to Harrenhal. It's better we save our men for the battles to come, besides the extra loot arriving will be good for the soldiers' morale. He didn't reply anything, but he was glad that his brother finally saw sense. That feeling was soon replaced however, as Rob continued. You're right about the situation east of here. Something needs to be done. It might also help to put Lord Dari at ease, as his lands border those troubled by the raiders. He agreed with those words, and he was about to say so, but his brother's gaze upon him made him pause. After a while it clicked inside of his head. You want me to lead those men, don't you? Rob smiled. I do. Some more experience will do you good. Besides it will do good if these Riverlanders see someone of our family protect and help them. He responded, you have already decided, haven't you? Nothing I can say will change your mind anymore. I know you too well to even try doing that. His brother smiled. I'm glad you accept your next command, Snow. Don't get too cocky, Stark. Wouldn't want me to accidentally charge your troops into some Reach army, would you? He responded jokingly. I wouldn't. Rob responded seriously, but without any bite. So, what's the plan? You'll take 1,000 men with you and march on Solpans. Clear out all the bandits from the Dari border and the town and then march across the lands until Maidenpool. There you give that Red Raper some taste of northern justice. I propose you geld him before taking his head, that'll show the next guy who wants to play at being a bandit lord in our kingdom. Maidenpool won't be rebuilt until after the war, but it might switch hands half a dozen times more until that happens. Don't be afraid to leave a message for the lions to find. Rob explained. The words were harsh, but it didn't surprise him anymore. Rob had learned a lot from Lord Ricard about the cruelties of war. Once, he would have complained and maybe even responded that that was not how his father would have fought. Much had changed since that time. He had heard many terrible stories of both Robert's rebellion and the Ironborn one, stories his father had never told them but was a part of. He had seen even more. Villages and towns razed to the ground by the Lannisters. Whole communities starved to death, with their corpses lying all across the streets. The bodies of little boys cut down while still lying in the arms of their, now dead, mothers. Girls, even younger than Arya, raped and left for dead by men twice his age. Peasants tortured, either for food, to send a message or even for the fun of some sick group of soldiers. No, war was horrible and a man with the name the Red Raper deserved to be gelded and put down. As did all those who followed him. He would do what needed to be done. Which men would you give me? All from our own contingent or also from other lords? He asked, knowing the drill by now. The majority will be our own Levi, yes, but not all. I plan to send both the Mutan and Cox contingents with you as well. The Mutangs are just over 100 strong and the Cox troops, led Sir Donald Cox the heir to Solpans, number around 250 men. It will do these men good to free their homes and restore order. A mix between Northmen and Riverlands is also the best idea, I think. The other 600 to 700 will Stark men. He nodded at the response. That would work out. The local people could also guide him and make travel a lot easier. The only problem would be to get them back with him. Most men wouldn't want to return to the army after they have seen their homes again. Especially not after these homes had been raided or threatened. Although it wouldn't do to worry about that now, he would fix that problem when it arose. How soon do you want me to leave? On the morrow, if possible. I'll let you pick out the Stark men yourself and have the Mouton and Cox commanders over soon to tell them to prepare. You only have to promise me one thing, brother. Rob responded. Ask and it shall be done. He replied without hesitation. This made a small smile creep on his brother's face. If you come into contact with any Reachman, you leave immediately, even if you haven't met your objectives yet. You come back to Harrenhal. I can't afford to lose 1,000 men, especially my own, over something as trivial as Solpants of the ruins of Maidenpool. Besides, if something were to happen to you, the army morale would plummet. I also can't do this without you. Losing you might break me and with it our whole cause. Rob said. The latter was accompanied by a cracking of his normally even exterior. His shoulders slumped down and he looked tired. He went up to his brother and grabbed him in an embrace. I will leave at the first sign of trouble with Talis' army, I promise. Besides, you can do this without me, but nonetheless you'll never have to. Rob nodded at that, as they broke away from their embrace. It's good to have you with me, Snow. I wouldn't know what to do half of the time if you weren't at my side. He smiled weakly. Yes, you would. Now toughen up, Stark. You have to talk to the Mouton and Cox commanders, while I select your best soldiers and steal them away. He grinned. His joke worked, as his grin was met by Rob's own. He made a mock bow, to emphasize his brother's kingly status, and left with the same grin still on his face. A week later. He had left Solpants yesterday. There he had met with Sir Quincy Cox. Having already cleared out half his lands of bandits before arriving there, the man had been more than welcoming. Another big factor was that he brought the man's remaining family back to him. His 3 sons and 2 sons-in-law had left with his forces. Both his youngest son and the husband of his eldest daughter had died in the fighting in the Riverlands, and the old knight was very happy to see the remainder of his family back. After some negotiating, he had allowed the heir Sir Donald Cox to remain with 50 men in his lands to take control and ensure that the situation remained stable. The other troops still followed him under the leadership of Sir Quincy's second son on his way to Maidenpool. In total, he had already hanged 123 bandits and broken men. Another 64 were on their way to Moat Cailin to join the Night's Watch. He hadn't forgotten his Uncle Benjen's pleas for more men. He had also remembered Rob of this fact all throughout their campaigns. Already bands of Ironborn and Bolton traitors had made it to the wall. Once they got control of Moat Cailin, big bands of bandits, broken men and Lannisters would be escorted there as well. In total the wall would be reinforced by over 500 men when all of their captives arrived. There could have been even more, but they made the conscious decision not to send the worst of their enemies to the wall. These served as an example and were to be held far away from important institutions like the Night's Watch. 500 extra recruits would do well, as there was talk of a big ranging disappearing on the other side of the wall. The Night's Watch would need the men. There also hadn't been any word from Uncle Benjen in almost a year, and he was feared lost. Whatever the case, he would make sure his pleas wouldn't fall on deaf ears. They had passed the Quiet Isle 3 hours ago and had already crossed the border with House Mouton, or so the commander of their troops had told him. Almost all of this territory was being terrorized by the infamous warlord that had settled in the ruins. The only downside of his work at Solpants had been that many bandits had fled towards Maidenpool. Apparently they realized they couldn't beat him alone and were banding together. He wouldn't put it past these bandits to try to lure him into an ambush, especially with their now enlarged number, and because of this he had sent out extra scouts. One of these scouts suddenly returned, as he saw a horseman riding over the hill. The man raced towards him. He only slowed down when he was very close. "My lord, I have ill news," he shouted out, clearly out of breath. "Calm down, good man," he told the man, urging him to take a few breaths first. After he had done so, he asked, "What is this ill news you speak of?" The scout immediately started explaining. "The Red Raper and his band of men have left Maidenpool and are waiting in ambush, less than an hour's ride from here. They took many of our number in surprise when we were riding through the area. To my knowledge, I'm the only one of my squadron that managed to escape. That was indeed grave news. Sir Bryndon would curse him for the loss of a dozen of his expert scouts. Those men weren't easy to replace. Much more important was the ambush. Did they see you escape? He asked, as calmly as he could. He tried to think of all possible scenarios but needed to know this first. No, my lord. I was scouting from higher up ground and saw what happened to the other scouts. Before I could do anything, they were assaulted by a force 10 times their size. The only useful thing that I could do was warn the army before they met the same fate. The Riverlander soldier explained. You did well, you should be proud. Your companions will soon be avenged. For now, you will be given something to eat after the hard ride. If you ride through to the center of the line, you will find some food and water. After that come back here, to show me where exactly the ambush is to take place. He told the scout, who nodded eagerly. You three, he pointed to some of his men, go get my commanders. Tell them to ride to the front as fast as possible. He had barely stopped speaking or the men had already turned their horse. Not much later his commanders had gathered, while the scout also returned. As they had continued to march further east in the meantime, the scout now estimated that they were half an hour from the ambush site. When that was mentioned, the Mouton captain said he knew the place. He also mentioned a path further south from it, from where they could attack the bandits in the rear. The ambush would take place out of a forest to the south of the road. To the north of the road there was only the Bay of Crabs. The enemy would try to slaughter them in a surprise attack and drive the rest into the bay. After triple-checking the plan, he quickly allowed the Mouton captain and all his men to split off and march south. He had another 80 of his own riders dispatched to accompany the captain and he prayed it would be enough. The word had been passed along the line to expect trouble. His soldiers were asked to stay on guard without being too obvious about it and most made it work. After a while the road swung a little closer to the bat and he saw the forest up ahead. It was situated on a hill next to the path. He had positioned men with big shields on the outside and had asked them to switch their sword hand on the march to the left so they would be better protected from missiles when the attack started on their right. Sure enough, soon they marched on the path and he felt the danger. Ghost became very restless and it made him look up. When he saw a glint of metal reflecting the sunlight, he knew they were there. Men, in position. Archers, prepare to shoot. We are under attack. He shouted. Immediately his army formed up and lines were drawn. Men in the second and third lines, get your shield above the heads of the men in front of you if you have any. Archers behind, fire at will, at anything you see move. He shouted above the sound of swords being drawn and men hurrying into position. His men obeyed without hesitation and soon a makeshift shield wall was being formed in the Valyrian style. He had read about it in a book from the library at White Harbor. It had always intrigued him and today proved useful. Mere seconds later a horn was heard. Dozens of men came running through the forest at once. They screamed and wildly swung their swords, while spears were thrown and arrows shot at them from up high. This brazen scare tactic might have worked on untrained Levi, but his men were all veterans of at least one battle. No Stark infantry actually fought at the Green Fork, but all had seen the carnage of a real battle. Besides that, they had been hardened after months of marching and training under Lord Ricard's guidance. His archers responded and soon some of their attackers came rolling from the hill as corpses, rather than enemy fighters. He soon saw fear and surprise in the eyes of some of the attackers, but still they charged. Hundreds of men soon pounced on his long-stretched makeshift shield wall. He himself had gotten off his horse and hidden behind the wall to protect himself from the projectiles. However, as soon as contact was made, he pushed himself to the front together with Ghost and his sword started singing. On moments like this he missed wielding ice, but there was nothing he could do about it. It had been his father's sword and belonged to Rob now. Ghost had leaped on two attackers from behind the shield wall and was mauling their faces into a horrible mess. In the meantime, he had already disposed of the first attacker and saw a second with an axe run at him. The men wore good chainmail, although it was a little worn down. From the colors on his battered tabard, he could see this man had once belonged to the retinue of House Brax. First, he had raided the Riverlands as part of the Lannister army and then he had deserted to keep raiding while the army left for King's Landing. He couldn't think of a more despicable calling. He effortlessly deflected the axe swing with his sword and stepped forward inside the man's guard. He hit him on the head with the hilt of his weapon and then knocked the axe out of his hand. Normally he would have given him the time to surrender now, but seeing that he had grabbed a dirk from in his belt, he did the only thing he could. He sidestepped and swung his sword in an upwards arch, cleaving the man's hand right from his arm. Before it could hit the floor, he had adjusted his body's stance and cut the man's neck open. The body hit the floor and he tried to ignore the sounds the man was making while choking in his own blood. He stepped over the body, ready to dispose of another enemy when he heard another horn. This one sounded very familiar and he smiled. The Mutongs had already arrived. Soon the sounds of battle were heard from inside the forest and a lot of the attackers stopped and looked around in surprise. That was, of course, the stupidest thing they could have done, unless they had planned to be picked off by his archers. "Charge, men!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. He himself charged in the flank of an enemy who was battling one of his men and threw him on the floor. He rolled on top of him and quickly stabbed his dagger in the opening of the armor around the armpit. He instinctively knew that he had time, as he felt that Ghost had his back and he didn't need to look up. When he finally did, he saw a man crying and screaming on the ground, his whole left arm torn from his shoulder. Ghost was holding two more men back and he charged the right one. His direwolf didn't need any command to know what he expected, as if they had done this 100 times before. They charged together as one. Ghost slashed at the left brigand's face with his paw, while he sent a flurry of sword strikes towards the right one. Soon he broke through the defense of the enemy in front of him and he stabbed him in the belly. He instinctively looked left, to see how Ghost was doing. Just as he looked, he saw the direwolf's teeth go around the neck of the man on the floor and a sickening crunch was heard as Ghost snapped his spine. This was all that was needed for all the enemies around him to start fleeing. Some of his men immediately ran after them. He saw 3 brigands go down with arrows stuck in their backs and more followed. When he looked to the right towards the rest of the battle, he saw that the enemy was starting to break on the whole front. "Onward, men! To victory!" he shouted, as he raised his sword, and the call was soon taken up all along the line. He ran forward but was soon passed by Ghost, who raced forward. He saw how his direwolf snapped at the ankles of multiple enemies. He didn't even bother to finish his targets, as the soldiers in behind took care of them when they reached the fallen enemies. Not much later he had reached the top of the hill and he saw fighting all around him. His men were clearly winning, but still resistance was much fiercer than down below. He ran into the thick of the fighting and slashed at a brigand's back, who was just about to finish off a Mutan men at arms. The man screamed in pain and that was all his ally needed to stick his dagger in the brigand's stomach. He ran deeper in the forest and was soon charged by a man wielding a vicious-looking mace. He sidestepped to dodge the first attack but didn't have any time to counter, as this was followed up by a vertical swing aimed at his arm. He caught the attack on the crossguard of his sword and punched the man in his face with his left. If he had to guess from the sound it made, the mailed glove had just broken his nose. Briefly stunned, the man took 2 steps back. Not wanting to give up his momentum, he himself stepped forward, still clamping the mace with his sword. In a move he had once learned from Sir Roderick, he pushed both their weapons up suddenly to bring the man out of balance and swept his hind leg from under him. He quickly broke his sword loose and stabbed down into the man's chest. He took a deep breath and pulled his sword loose with a twist, as to make sure the man would die. He looked around and saw most of the bandits flee, his soldiers hot on their tails. However, a group of around 30 of them was still doggedly resisting some 50 yards to his right. They were surrounded and had nowhere to go. He ran over there, clenching his sword as he reached out to Ghost to come to him. As he moved past his soldiers and he reached the first enemy. The moment he crossed swords with him, a familiar white animal ran past him. On his way, he knocked the opponent in front him over and he quickly ended him with a slash across his neck. Then Ghost leaped on another attacker. He quickly followed after him, as he saw one of the outlaws charge at his companion with a spear. He made it in time and slashed at the spear viciously. It flew to the side, the enemy only just barely managing to keep hold of it. Remembering all his lessons of fighting against spearmen, he knew he had to close the distance. He waited until his opponent attacked him once more and deflected the attack with a subtle move of his wrist. He then stepped inside the man's guard, raised his sword and knocked the spear down. In one fluent motion, he pulled out his dagger, turned and buried it deep in the man's skull, right through his left eye. The lifeless body, with his dagger still inside the eye socket, fell lifelessly to the ground moments later. He again gripped his sword with two hands and went into a defensive stand, as he expected another enemy to come at him, but none came. He looked around and saw his enemies look at him and Ghost in horror. Seeing their expressions, he calmly ordered, "Surrender. Surrender now or die like that, you have the choice," he said, as he pointed with his sword at their mauled companion in front of Ghost. They looked at him in fear and soon they all surrendered, all but one. This was clearly their leader, as he started shouting at the men around him to keep fighting. Seeing how his attempts to rally his companions were in vain, he stepped forward towards him and challenged him. "You fight me. One-on-one, we'll see how well you'll order my men after that." He merely scoffed at the notion, noticing the blood-red tabard the man was wearing. "Were you any honorable man or a noble, I would accept. With you, I don't see any reason to do so. I won't filthy my sword with the blood of a rapist." "Ha, you scared boy. And rapist. You probably never touched a woman, ha?" the man taunted, obviously trying to tempt him into a fight. He merely locked eyes at the man. After a few seconds he commanded Ghost in a low voice and more wasn't needed. His direwolf next to him stalked forward. The bandit leader clearly recognized the danger and knowing it was his only viable choice, he charged the direwolf. Ghost however was prepared for this. He quickly ran towards him and scratched the right leg out from under his opponent with his paw. He followed it up with a bite and tore off the man's sword hand at the wrist. Just as he was going to go in for the kill, he called him back. "Ghost, no. We have more use for him alive." The wolf stopped immediately. He felt the connection at the back of his head and knew his companion would obey. He wondered if he could have commanded him by simply thinking the words, instead of saying them. Ghost held his head just in front of the brigand leader, who was crying from the pain at his now stump. All around him, men were stupefied by how short the fight had been. He didn't bat an eye. Ghost was a killer when he needed to be and that filth deserved his wrath. "You, take those men into custody," he ordered his men, as he pointed to those who had surrendered. "The two of you, take this rapist piece of shit down the hill. The king ordered me to geld him before I took his head." All soldiers agreed quickly and ran to take care of his orders. The next day, they had made camp close to the battle site yesterday. They had used their positioning to loot the enemy camp and hunt some more of the bandits that had hidden themselves. Now they were well on their way to Maidenpool. They had some 3 hours to go until they reached the remnants of the city. His scouts had already reported that the site was nearly empty. The bandits had taken most of their number to ambush him and he had killed or captured most of them, some 250 by his estimation. The other 100 or so were scattered across the land and wouldn't be able to get back to their stronghold in time. He expected less than 100 enemies to be present and would make clear work of them. Yesterday, he himself had taken the heads of the worst of the brigands and hung their bodies from the trees. The other captives he had sent towards Diari and Solpans. He would let the local lords deal justice, as he didn't have the time for it himself. They would be offered the black or would be hung to show the local populace that order had been restored. He felt quite confident, as he talked with the Maidenpool commander. The weather was quite enjoyable, the sun shining with a light breeze coming from the bay. They were making very good time and only token resistance was to be expected from now on. Still, he had done the diligent thing and sent out scouts far and wide in every direction. Even so, he was quite surprised when 2 scouts came riding towards him. Another ambush. That couldn't be true, could it? The outlaws shouldn't have the men left to set that up anymore. "Lords, no, we bring news." The first scout started, as he respectfully lowered his head. He gestured to the man to continue. "Our group of scouts has clashed with another group of outriders. They wore tabards in orange with 3 black castles on it. We managed to fight them off and they fled to the southeast. We almost managed to catch one, but he escaped in the end. We don't know anything more from them or where they came from, I'm afraid." The scout explained apologetically. "Do you have any casualties?" he asked routinely. No, my lord. Only small wounds were received and all of our group will be able to carry on with their duties. He nodded at the man and thought about his words. 3 black castles on an orange background, he knew that signal, but where did he know it from? Suddenly it hit him. He had refreshed all he knew about the Reach when in Riverrun. They were expected to fight them at one point, and it was better to know your enemy. The signal he was thinking about belonged to House Peak. That meant Tali was close by, or at least part of his force was. He wanted to push forth towards Maidenpool, root out the brigands and bring order back to these lands, but Rob had given him clear orders. It would also be the most prudent. If Tali heard who was in Maidenpool, he might rush and encircle him with a few thousand men. No, they had to leave. He gave the order towards his men to halt and called all his captains towards him and gave his order. Most looked completely abashed, but almost all fell in line after he told them of the clear orders he had gotten from the king. The only ones who didn't accept his words so easily were the men that hailed from these parts. They had looked forward to restoring their homeland and maybe see if their families were still alive. This possibility was now denied to them and they didn't like it. He spent some time explaining them that they had dealt with the greatest part of the bandit threat. He also stated that any reclamation of Maidenpool would be undone by the Reachmen anyway, possibly with more destruction in its wake. It was this last argument that won them over, and so an hour later his army turned around and marched back the way they came from. He also sent out more riders to try and locate the Reachman force. One ambush was more than enough to his liking. He sighed. His campaign had started so well, but now it ended prematurely. Technically, he had reached all his objectives. He had brought back order to the lands of House Cox and taken care of some 200 outlaws on their lands. He had diminished the threats to the lands of House D'Ari. Finally, he had brought the Red Raper and most of his small army of brigands to justice. Still, it irked him that he hadn't been able to free the lands of House Mouton like he had done with those of House Cox. Deep inside, he knew that it would never have lasted anyway. Tali was too close and most of those lands too separated from the real front line. Nevertheless, these were loyal Riverlanders that were suffering. He clenched his teeth and rode on, back to Harrenhal as silent as ghost beside him. Oberyn Martell. He looked on the waves of Blackwater Bay, as they crashed into the hull of the ship. The ship he was on was called the Daughter of the Rowan. It belonged to a rare trader hailing from Planky Town. He was one of the children of the Green Blood who provisioned his people with goods from outside Dawn. In the meantime, the man also made profits in Sunspear and the places he sailed towards to get goods from. It had been an incredible stroke of luck that he had been anchored in King's Landing at right this time. If he hadn't, his life might have been forfeit. The worst thing was that it would have been for something he hadn't actually done. He was not called the Red Viper for nothing, and he knew he deserved death for many of his deeds, but the one he was accused of here wasn't one of them. He had arrived in the capital at his brother's behest to take his place on the small council. Everything had gone just about how he had expected it, although the weakness of the Lannisters surprised him. Oh, the old lion tried to mask it, of course, but he saw right through that farce. It was clear the Lannisters were weaker than they had ever been since the death of the old Lord Tytos Lannister. They weren't out of the game yet, but they were treading on a dangerous path. Many concessions had been made to the Tyrells for their alliance. Margaery was promised the crown, that Prixaloras was made a Kingsguard as well as another son of one of Mace's friends. Lands and tax reliefs were promised to almost all the loyal lords of the Reach, and prestigious positions in the newly formed City Watch were given away by the dozens. He had even heard whispers of a possible marriage between Willers and the Dowager Queen or another Lannister. He surely hoped for the fate of his friend that these were unfounded, but you could never know for sure. The city was a disaster. The Battle of the Blackwater had destroyed much of the city's infrastructure, most notably the whole of Flea Bottom was gone, and it didn't stop there, as some surrounding neighborhoods, as well as other parts of the city, were wiped off the map due to fires too. The biggest problem, however, was the loss of population and manpower. The city, which formerly had around 500,000 inhabitants, now only sported half of that. He hadn't been able to believe his eyes when he saw that and had gone to investigate. It seemed that around 90,000 people had died or fled in the first riots, combined with its crackdown by the Imp. The weeks of riots had caused many fires and food shortages that had cost the lives of thousands of the small folk. There were also many reports of large groups of people fleeing across the Crown lands, as well as some that went into the Reach and Storm lands at that time, so 90,000 should be reasonably correct information. However, the bigger hit had come with the Battle of the Blackwater. As thousands of the city's inhabitants had joined with Stannis, the population had been viciously sacked in response. Not only those that had taken up arms or their families, but whole quarters of the city had been violated by the victorious army during and right after the battle. The battle itself had taken the lives of tens of thousands of citizens. They were either killed in the fighting, butchered in their homes, or they died in one of the many fires or stampedes that followed it. However, the biggest shock wasn't the amount of deaths, but the amounts of people fleeing. Some 20,000 people reportedly fled into the Reach in only a few days' time, most gathering around Tumbleton. Another 10,000 or so disappeared in the Kingswood, many of those scattered into smaller groups and marched into the Stormlands. Maybe they were hoping to hide among Baratheon loyalists. The biggest groups hadn't marched south though, they had marched north. Between 50 and 80,000 men had fled to the north and northwest. Some 15,000 people had stayed in the lands from Rosby to Duskendale in this second wave, while a few thousand marched to Rook's Rest and beyond to Cracklaw Point. The small council had tried multiple measures to have them return to the capital, but to their dismay only a few hundred did so. The biggest group marched into the Riverlands by a dozen different paths. This movement had taken place over a span of many weeks or even months after the sack, and as such it was hard to track how many people actually marched there. Most agreed that between 40 and 60,000 small folk fled towards their enemies. In truth, it was not so surprising they sought refuge with the Lannisters' enemies. Besides, the Riverlands had been deeply depopulated by Tywin, and it had procured a lot of food from their raids in the west. They had both land, food and work aplenty. If he had been a low-born citizen of King's Landing after that carnage, he might have tried his luck in Fairmarket, Stony September or the surrounding lands as well. To his shock, still people were leaving. Every day dozens of people could be seen that had packed up all their belongings and were leaving the city. As small fighting broke out in the north again, most of these went south to either the Reach or towards the Baratheon lords that had bent the knee in the Stormlands or Southern Crown lands, but some dared to go to Duskendale still. The conclusion of his inquiry had been that the city had indeed depopulated at a frightening pace and that it was still losing population at a slow rate until this day. This investigation, together with his duties on the small council, had taken most of his time. That was until that messenger arrived. His problems had all started with that damned messenger. If he was honest, he respected Robb Stark for doing something so bold. When the messenger had called Joffrey an incestuous bastard without blinking, all hell had broken loose in the throne room. The blonde prick had screamed to kill them all for everyone to hear, while the Queen Mother hadn't behaved much better. The Kingsguard had had the man and his companions on their knees at sword point in seconds, but still the messenger didn't blink. The man himself had been some Ryswell cousin, and he had balls of steel that one. Without even so much as looking towards the blade that was at his neck, he looked up to Tywin Lannister and stated that his king, Robb Stark, had written at the end of his letter that if any of his envoys was hurt, the same fate would befall the Kingslayer. This had prompted Tywin Lannister to stop the executions, even if his grandson was still screaming that he didn't care. The young king kept screeching that they should die anyway and that his uncle had lost his battle, so he had chosen his fate. After that a great shouting match had started, as Queen Cersei suddenly forgot about the comments as she started defending her brother. It had taken a very big showing of the Old Lion's authority to take control, and even then it took far too long. At one point the Lannister guards had even stood against the Kingsguard, but the latter had backed down as most of them were either in his own or the Tyrell's pocket. The Lord of Casterly Rock had stoically taken the letter. He had read the letter with the small council after the commotion had died down. He had almost chuckled when he had read that the young Stark had indeed been as bold as to put that at the end of the letter. Lord Lannister had taken a long look at the Northman when he first set his eyes on the paper. After a while he had concluded that His Grace King Joffrey and his council rejected these terms. Afterwards the Northman had been escorted out of the city by a very sizable Lannister detachment with great haste. However, the atmosphere at court would never be the same anymore. The aura of victory after the Battle of the Blackwater had been broken, and now all in attendance were either plotting or preparing for the coming battles. In some cases they were doing both, he was sure. Things had calmed down a little when the wedding started getting close, especially after Lord Tarley had left with a big part of the Reach's hotheads to Duskendale to counter Robb Stark's raiding into the Crown lands. This had all changed when Joffrey had decided to die at his own wedding. To him it had immediately been clear that the boy was poisoned. The poison, if he had to take guess, could have been the strangler. As the boy lay there choking, he immediately thought about possible orchestrators. His eye soon landed on Lady Olenna as his main suspect. The boy had obviously been a psychopath, and maybe she didn't want that for her pretty granddaughter. However, knowing Olenna, she would probably force her marriage to Tommen and be done with it. That way they wouldn't lose any influence. While he had been debating all of this in his head, the Queen Mother's screeching had suddenly taken a dark turn. Suddenly Cersei Lannister had pointed towards him as she screamed at the top of her lungs. The Dornish have done this. First, they take my beloved daughter, and now my firstborn, my Joffrey. Guards, take them all into custody. They poisoned my son. Take Oberyn Martell to the Black Cells. He couldn't believe his own ears. The problem was that he had his own reputation against him. He wasn't called the Red Viper for nothing, and all knew of his proclivity with poisons. However, that didn't dissuade the Dornish nobles to stand up for him, and soon daggers were drawn. He looked over and saw that the young Lord Edric Dane had taken his dagger out as well. He quickly grabbed the boy close and took the dagger out of his hands. The Dane line was too small already, and he had spent a lot of influence to free the boy. He wouldn't have him captured again. He owed Ashura the safety of her nephew and family line. It had almost come to a confrontation, and some of the Tyrells seemed quite happy that he was being accused of the crime. Of course, that oaf Mace Tyrell still hated him for the accident with Willers, even as his friend had long since forgiven him. To his surprise, it had been Tywin Lannister who had come through. The old lion had tried to persuade him to send the Dornish armies to his aid for weeks, and maybe he thought it would help if he was in his debt here. It could also be that he just didn't want to jeopardize the alliance with his brother, or maybe he didn't want to risk his granddaughter if anything were to happen to him. He and his companions had been brought to their chambers by Lannister men. Still, he had noticed how 4 of them remained outside of his doors. No doubt that had been for his protection. As there was nothing he could do. After thinking it over a couple more times, he had just went to bed with Ellaria. Sex always cleared his mind, and no one was better at it than his paramour. They had just been in their second time of love-making when a voice had been heard. To his surprise, Lord Varys had stood in the middle of his room and asked him to follow him. He had told him that Cersei had been planning a move against him behind her father's back, together with some of the Tyrells. On the morrow he would have been brought to a more secure prison from where he wouldn't be able to escape from. It hadn't taken long for him to dress himself and pack most of his important stuff. He had stuffed it all in a big bag which he had hauled on his back. After that, the eunuch had led him and Ellaria through a maze of tunnels until they had been in the city, and soon his noble companions had joined him as well from multiple directions. The spider had told him that he would ensure fighting broke out between his company and the Lannisters at different points, and the guards in front of his rooms would die, so they just suspected he fought his way out. The spider had managed to procure them 2 ships, one of which was the daughter of the Rowan on which he now stood. Around 120 of his soldiers and all the nobles had been evacuated. Great effort was done, so Lord Dane was evacuated too. Sadly, this had meant that 180 of his troops were left in the city, although Varys told them he would send an accomplice to get some of them horses and move south. The spider's motive still irked him. When he had asked the eunuch, he had just smiled cryptically. Not all of us have forgotten the fall of the dragons, Prince Oberyn. This had scared him beyond belief. Did the spider know of his brother's secret arrangement? If yes, how long had he known? Would he support them? Would he support Quentyn's claim if he came back with Daenerys Targaryen? Too many questions were left unanswered, and he didn't like it one bit. For now, all he could was sail home and inform Doran. The fact that he had rescued the lord of one of their oldest and biggest vassals from a Lannister dungeon was a victory, even if he had lost almost 200 men in doing so. Besides, they still had Myrcella. The Lannisters wouldn't be so foolish as to make a move that could endanger her. Or would they? Already stories were heard of Tywin Lannister plotting against Robb Stark even when his son was in his prison. The Kingslayer had lost his hand due to this, he had been told in whispers. Doran, he needed Doran. His elder brother would figure all of this out. He would make sense of this all and he would happily help execute his brother's plans to avenge Elia and the betterment of Dorne. Dorne had been silent for too long, he would urge Doran to act and take great joy in accomplishing their vengeance. Chapter 37, The Defense of the North. 300 AC. Jon. It was the second day of the new year. On the horizon he could see the towers of Harrenhal high in the sky. Finally, he would rejoin the army again. The last 5 days had been a nightmare. Twice he had to change direction to avoid the Reach forces and their scouts. First, he had wanted to go straight west to the army.